Hi everyone. Is it just me, or 2026 is like I know we're going into April, but I feel like a year has already gone by in 2026. I hope that makes sense. So much is happening. So this is part 1 of April monthly horoscopes because honestly, I was sitting through, obviously this is not conclusive. I'm not going to go through every single detail of April, but there was just so many things that I couldn't leave out. I just think they're too important for what's happening this month. So I broke it down into parts, not only for the amount of things that are happening, but I think that April might be better for sort of like taking 1 week at a time because there's so much happening. So again, this is going to be over 4 parts. I'm going to do each part per week so you can prepare for the following week. Again, not conclusive, not going to go over every detail. This is really bird's eye view. And this would probably be the better time to subscribe, follow, so that you get updated for when part 2, part 3, part 4 is posted if you haven't already. Again, I'm Eastern Standard Time Zone in the US, so you can also kind of edit the days and the times if you want to get really nitty-gritty. And I also think that collectively, I think a lot has already happened. More is going to happen collectively, and I just see a lot of stuff in the world potentially initiating this month. So I want April to be a time where we can shelf whatever BS, chaos, confusion, whatever it is, shelf it and focus on ourselves. I think this is a good month to do so. You know, it's like at some point the world's going to do what it's going to do, but I really want to focus on you, the individual, in April. So really going through each rising sign, providing more personalized, more positive things to focus on, more constructive things to focus on, while maybe the world sorts itself out, you know? So anyways, there will be timestamps for each rising sign in the description or the show notes below. So that's always going to be there, but I just want to put that as a reminder if you are new here. Anyways, let's get into week 1 of April. Hi, Aries Risings. So right on April 1st, we literally have a full moon culminating in your Libra 7th house of the other, partnerships, personal, professional, including marriage, if applicable to you. But if you're watching, you'll notice full moons or the sun and the moon in opposition. So this full moon is technically, in my opinion, really highlighting the first house of the self, so literally you, versus the 7th house of the other. So this is highlighting the axis of sort of your needs versus the needs of others, what's going on with you and your ability to kind of take independent action, your physical body, any of those themes, versus what's playing out or culminating or being illuminated regarding personal and professional partnerships, or the personal and professional partnerships you want to attract. If you're married or you're partnered up, this could culminate or bring something to fruition within those partnerships as well. Now, the ruler of this full moon in your Libra 7th house of partnership is Venus. And Venus is in rulership in your Taurus 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. So something could be culminating around sort of you versus your partnerships, again, personal or professional. and something financial, right? Because the ruler of this full moon is in a financial house. This could also include self-worth, your value system. So some of you, it might be more psychological. Some of you, it might be quite literal. Like there is a financial matter being highlighted or coming to fruition. I mean, this is tax season in the United States. So if you're married and filing jointly, you know, or you're in a business partnership, this could definitely, you know, highlight or amplify or even energize sort of those themes playing out around this time. So the other thing I want to mention about this Venus is that even though this Venus is in rulership and ruling over this full moon, culminating in this area of partnership, this Venus is starting to form the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 11th house of your social network, which could be personal or professional, and your long-term goals. So some of you actually might be able to think back to when Venus was conjunct Pluto, initiating that new cycle back towards the end of January. Some of you could have felt it maybe, you know, really the second half of January. So what was going on financially? What was going on with personal and professional partnerships that maybe was initiating or coming up around this time that could have involved your overall social network or your long-term goals? That now this Venus is forming this opening square for you. And this could be the point in time where maybe you take action. Maybe it's a point in time where you take change around the long-term goals, the social network, and the financial situation as something is maybe culminating around the people you want to surround yourselves with, personal and professional partnerships, etc. Additionally, on April 1st, some of you, it might be the April 2nd, we have Mercury in your Pisces 12th house of behind the scenes. You know, subconscious thought patterns, solitude, forming or really applying to a trine to Jupiter at 15 degrees, also direct in your Cancer 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So trines dissolve obstacles. And what's interesting about this is that we have this full moon happening, culminating this Aries Libra axis of you versus the other. And Mercury rules your 6th house of daily work, health, and routines. Trine Jupiter, which rules this Pisces 12th house of behind the scenes, subconscious thought patterns, dreams, solitude. So what's interesting is that Mercury in Pisces, trine Jupiter in Cancer, yes, it's between your 12th and your 4th house, so behind the scenes, home, family, property, and real estate. But what those planets rule in your chart is also the Pisces Virgo axis. So it could be stuff going on with you, your physical body, also what's going on with, you know, personal and professional partnerships for some of you. But it's also sort of highlighting the 6th house of daily work, health, routines, the 12th house of behind the scenes, what's going on mentally, what's going on, you know, that you don't necessarily publicly advertise with the world. That the trine between Mercury and Jupiter could dissolve the obstacles around something that you feel behind the scenes, something you've been working on behind the scenes, maybe mental clarity. There's lots of possibilities versus dissolving obstacles around the work that you want to do, the health and vitality you need, as this full moon is highlighting your 1st house of the physical body versus personal and professional partnerships. So I hope that makes sense. So even though Mercury is trine Jupiter, the areas of your chart that it rules is this Pisces Virgo axis as well. So there could be that trine dissolving the obstacles could help sort of balance the 6th and 12th house axis for some of you, as I mentioned. What else on this day? Oh, Jupiter in your Cancer 4th house at 15 degrees is technically in a T-square with the sun and the moon in this full moon. And across your first and your seventh. So this Jupiter is getting 2 squares, one from the sun, one from the moon. And so there's a lot of pressure on this Jupiter to act, to take action. Now, this is a full moon. The moon moves very quickly. So some of you could feel this briefly, really going into April, around April 1st even. But I think it's worth mentioning where oftentimes when we experience T-squares, it really gets us up to take action. And again, Jupiter rules this 12th house of behind the scenes, forming the trine or in a trine with this Mercury. So some of you might be taking action on something that's going on behind the scenes. Jupiter also rules your Sagittarius 9th house of growth and potential, which could include publishing, teaching, travel, spirituality, higher knowledge, which could be career related for some of you. So even though Jupiter is in this 4th house, which is very foundational, home, family, property, and real estate, what it rules in your chart could signify maybe some of you are taking action around like a living situation or something foundationally to support your overall growth and potential, which could be career related, as well as support sort of like maybe what's been going on behind the scenes, what's been going on mentally, etc., etc. Now I want to jump to April 6th. So as we get through the first week, let me see if I need to get this a little bit more exact if you're watching. So on April 6th, we have an exalted sun in your Aries first house of the self. So this is the sun is exalted. It is the honored guest in your Aries first house, which technically is a good thing. Now, this sun is left in a square with Jupiter. So remember earlier in the week, I mentioned the T-square with the sun and the moon in opposition, this full moon in your 7th house of partnership, where Jupiter was in that T-square. It was getting 2 squares from the sun and the moon. Well, as you get later in the week, it's just the sun and Jupiter in a square between your 1st house of self and your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. Now, what's important to know about this is that, yes, it is a square. However, both the sun and Jupiter are exalted. So the way I like to think about it is if, say, one planet was exalted and the other one was not, or didn't have much essential dignity, or was even in like detriment or fall or whatever. The one that's exalted gets a little bit more, like if you're in a conversation and someone knows more or they have more experience, they're going to say more, they're going to have more say in the conversation. That's not the case here. Both of these, this is a strong square. Both of these planets are exalted. They are equal players. And so I think that adds to the action, adds to the potential ability and resources to make a tangible change in our lives. So yes, it's between your 1st house of self, so literally you, and your Cancer 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So you could see it play out in those areas. However, this square, I think, has the potential to create new potential outcomes to your 5th house of creativity, self-expression, joy, children as well, if applicable, and also create potentially new outcomes to your growth and potential, which could be career related for some of you. As that could impact you sort of behind the scenes or mentally. So again, it could play out between you personally and sort of a living situation, people you live with, home, family, property, real estate themes. But where it could be creating new potentials in your life is travel, growth and potential, publishing, teaching, spirituality, more knowledge, the ability to seek more knowledge, as well as the creativity, the self-expression, or the children. Now, additionally, on April 6th, Venus in rulership. So Venus is comfortable here. Venus is home in your Taurus second house of earned income and self-worth. Will be in a sextile to the North Node in your Pisces 12th house and a trine to the South Node in your Virgo 6th house of daily work, health, and routines. So whatever action or change some of you are taking towards the end of the first week of April, very different from the beginning of the first week of April, you could be like the change and the new outcomes and potentials that I discussed could also be involving the ability to create opportunity for finances, financial budgets, your self-worth. That could be really coming from something behind the scenes, coming from like a creative idea you've been working on behind the scenes, could be coming from, the work that you want to do, the vitality you want to feel, and sort of, your sixth house routines. So this is not just a Sun Jupiter square creating potentially new outcomes to sort of your overall growth and potential, which could be career related, as well as your creativity, your self-expression, or children if applicable. But I think the Venus sextile the North Node and trine the South Node could also be involving some sort of flow, maybe happening with the work that you want to do, maybe work opportunities, stuff playing out with coworkers, routines, vitality, that could be sort of dissolving obstacles for financial opportunities, self-worth opportunities, as well as, anything that some of you might be working on behind the scenes. That could be financially related or self-worth related. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of your April horoscope on April 5th. Hi, Taurus Risings. So right on April 1st, we have this full moon at 12 degrees, culminating, illuminating, closing something out regarding work, health, routines. What's going on with your health, your overall vitality? What's being energized around your routines, your organization, or even being highlighted around your coworkers, your daily work routines. So this full moon, yes, it is in your 6th house, but I would also pay attention to your Aries 12th house. How is your, what's going on mentally? What's going on with your sleep, your subconscious thought patterns? Because this full moon is really highlighting the 12th and 6th house axis in your chart. So really paying attention to your mind and your body, paying attention to things that affect your mind and body. The 12th house is technically hidden enemies. So, and that's not always people, but for some of you, something might be illuminated around, or something could be illuminated that you couldn't quite see before, that's affected your mind, your body, sort of your subconscious thought patterns, your work, your routines, etc. So definitely going into April for Taurus risings, I recommend just being a little extra aware of your sleep. What's going on mentally, what's going on with your routines, your work, your health, and really focusing on that, especially because so much ramps up in April. And with you going into April, having this 6th and 12th house axis highlighted, essentially, this could be a time to really pay attention to those things to kind of help you move through the month, even, again, if that resonates. So additionally, on April 1st or 2nd, depending on where you are, Mercury will be applying to a trine with Jupiter. So Mercury in your Pisces 11th house of social network, personal or professional, will be applying to a trine with Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer third house of communication, siblings, extended family. Now, this communication could be professionally related. Third house is also technology, transportation, which could also be professionally related for some of you. Depending on your natal chart, there's a lot of possibilities because this could also be home, family, property, real estate if your IC is in your Cancer third house. So again, take what resonates, leave the rest. But basically, Mercury applying to a trine to Jupiter. Yes, this is between your 11th and your 3rd. So what's being communicated regarding social network, personal or professional, long-term goals. For some of you, if it's more family related, siblings, extended family, and long-term goals. But what I want to point out is that as this full moon is culminating and it's highlighting your 6th and 12th axis that I just went over, Mercury and Jupiter in this trine configuration rule 2 axes in your chart. So for some of you, regarding this 3rd and 11th house trine, it could actually create new outcomes to your finances because Mercury rules your Gemini 2nd house of earned income and Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 8th house of resources, other people's resources, including partnerships, if that's applicable to you, those long-term finances, investments, assets, debt, loans, etc. So Mercury, again, rules this Gemini 2nd house. Jupiter rules this Sagittarius 8th house. So this is really this financial axis for the most part being highlighted with this trine. The other potential is that Mercury also rules this Virgo 5th house of creativity, self-expression, joy, children, if applicable to you. And Jupiter rules this Pisces 11th house of friends, groups, communities, long-term goals. So your social network and your long-term goals. So yes, this is a Mercury-Jupiter trine. But as you go into April, maybe some of you are experiencing sort of more flow, the dissolution of obstacles, that maybe creates new outcomes to financial budgets, finances, or some of you might see it in the create new outcomes to the other Mercury-Jupiter axis, which is sort of your creativity, your self-expression, your long-term goals, and your social network. Now, the other thing I want to mention about April 1st, I mean, like literally day 1 of April, so much. This Jupiter at 15 degrees will technically be in a T-square with the sun and the moon in this opposition with this full moon in your Libra 6th house and the sun in your Aries 12th house. So basically, Jupiter is the apex planet. Jupiter is getting 2 squares, 1 square from the sun, 1 square from the moon. And so there's a lot of pressure on Jupiter to act. So some of you, the last couple days, I would say, as you're going into April, you might feel this more with the applying, but definitely by April 1st, this Jupiter has a lot of pressure to act. So some of you might feel this full moon, I think, has a potential to create a lot of action for some of us. Now, again, this Jupiter rules your Pisces 11th house of long-term goals, social network, and your Sagittarius 8th house of sort of those long-term finances, other people's resources if applicable. So the action that's being taken could, again, play into those financial themes, creating new long-term financial themes or partners' resources, etc. The next thing I want to jump to is April 6th. So again, the first half of the first week of April is different from the second half. So once we get to, through the weekend, into April 6th, which is Monday, we could be in a different vibe, a different feel. Because, let me get this if you're watching just a little bit more exact. So once we get to April 6th, we will have, I'm just going to leave it right here. All right. Again, Mercury's still in Pisces, so I am a struggle bus in terms of communication right now, so bear with me. All right, so April 6th, some of you might feel this Sunday, April 5th, a little bit later on Monday, but again, roughly around April 6th. Remember how I mentioned the T-square between the sun and the moon, with that full moon earlier in the week, technically forming a T-square with Jupiter. Now when we get to later in the week, the weekend into Monday, April 6th, that moon has moved on, and now Jupiter and the sun will be in a square. Why I think this is important to mention is both the sun and Jupiter are exalted in this square. So both of these planets they're sort of the honored guest in these areas, and both are well resourced. They have a good amount of strength. So it's sort of like one is not stronger than the other, so to speak, theoretically speaking. Both are coming into this conversation as more so equals, okay? That makes a difference because I think that adds strength to the action that some of you might be taking. Now, again, this is between your 12th and your 3rd. So some of you might be having private conversations. Some of you might be working on something behind the scenes regarding, professional work with communication, technology, transportation. Some of you might be, communicating or doing something behind the scenes with a sibling, extended family. Some of you might be taking action behind the scenes regarding a home, family, property, real estate situation, depending on your natal chart. Lots of possibilities here. But what could be playing out behind the scenes, whether it's mental or actually physical, that is playing a part in now taking action more locally, taking action with your communication, short distance travel, siblings, extended family, things happening in your everyday environment. So again, both are exalted. Now, whatever action you're taking later in the week or around Monday, April 6th, it could create new potential outcomes to your Leo 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate, because the sun rules your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. This could also create new potential outcomes to Jupiter ruled areas, such as your Pisces 11th house of your social network, your long-term goals, and your Sagittarius 8th house of other people's resources, including a partner's resources, if applicable, long-term financial plans, etc. So again, whatever action some of you might be taking, again, take what resonates, leave the rest. It could be setting things up to create new outcomes to your goals, your foundation, your long-term financial goals. The last thing I want to mention about April 6th, really going into April 6th, so again, some of you might feel this a day before, day after, Venus in your Taurus first house of self. Now, Venus is in rulership here. Venus is very comfortable here. So, Venus at the same time will be sextile the North Node in your Pisces 11th house of social network, long-term goals. And it will be trine the South Node in your Virgo 5th house of creativity, self-expression, joy, children, if applicable to you. Now, Venus is in rulership fairly well resourced. Also rules your Libra 6th house of health, work, routines. So some of you might see opportunities and flow around your physical body, your vitality, your health. And some of you might see more flow and opportunities regarding a work situation, coworkers, regarding sort of your social network and your long-term goals. So again, take what resonates. So as we go into April, things I think kind of intensify. There's a lot of like potential energy. Then when we get towards the last couple days of that first week of April, again, the weekend of April 4th, 5th, and then certainly when we get to April 6th, I think that the square between two planets and its place of exaltation, the resources, the ability to take action for some of us. And that can create sort of new outcomes to a living situation, relationships with family, property, real estate, renovations, relocations, and also creating new potential opportunities to sort of those long-term finances that might play a part in that foundation, right? The property, the real estate for some of you. So again, take what resonates. As well as maybe something sort of flowing, something happening with work, with coworkers, that could be potential opportunities or flow, or this might be sort of your physical body, your health, your vitality, and sort of those long-term goals playing out. But I will leave you with some cycle stuff. So as we get into the first week of April, Venus will be in forming this opening square to Pluto. So the first couple of days of April, Venus is going to be forming this opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 10th house of career, business, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. So some of you might be able to think back to really roughly around the second half of January. What was going on with work? What was going on with career? Things that bring you fulfillment and its impacts to you personally. As you get into April, Venus is going to be forming that opening square. So that first opening square of taking action, creating change, initiating something for some of you regarding the work, the health, the routines. But I think for some of you, this could definitely be sort of work and career related, if that's applicable, to really initiating the action, the change, especially with a full moon going into April, culminating in that Libra 6th house. I think a lot of you could see some energy, I think, especially with your ruling planet, Venus, in your first house of the physical body, your ability to take independent action. I think some of you might be going into April feeling a little fired up, a little bit ready to take action, create change around sort of your work, your health, your routines, your physical body, ability to take independent action. And for some of you, that could involve sort of your career, your business, your public recognition themes. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of your April horoscope on April 5th. Hi, Gemini Risings. Right on April 1st, we are kicking off April with this full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 5th house of joy. Now, this 5th house could include creativity, creative projects, self-expression, romance, children if applicable to you. But with full moons, I always like to consider the opposite house, which is your Aries 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals. So what's really being highlighted around what brings you joy versus your long-term goals, what's going on with social network. And the ruler of this full moon is Venus. And Venus will be in rulership. So Venus is quite comfortable. Venus is home in your Taurus 12th house of behind the scenes, subconscious thought patterns. So Venus is sort of working behind the scenes. more in private here. And whatever is culminating around a long-term goal, maybe something's playing out with social network, creative projects, romance, children if applicable. Maybe it's tied to something or connected to what's happening behind the scenes or vice versa. So very, very interesting full moon for Gemini risings, as it's really highlighting this 5th, 11th house axis, but indicating that potentially some of you could be kind of working on something regarding those themes behind the scenes. And this Venus in your Taurus 12th house is starting to form an opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 9th house of growth and potential. So this could include sort of, growth and potential themes like spirituality, higher knowledge, travel, truth, belief, publishing, teaching. So this could be career related for some of you. And this opening square that Venus is making is connected to when Venus was conjunct Pluto the second half of January. So some of you might be able to think back to the second half of January. What was really amplifying, what was really initiating, starting out, that could have had growth and potential themes that maybe some of you were thinking about or working on behind the scenes, or maybe it involved your creativity, a romantic situation, children if applicable. Again, take what resonates, leave the rest. Either way, whatever was going on towards the end of January, Venus creating this opening square is that first opening action. What change do you want to make? What edits do you want to make? What actions do you want to take to create new outcomes, new, edits or changes to that situation if it resonates? So, still on April 1st, we also have Mercury in your Pisces 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment, forming a trine. So applying to a trine to Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. Now, even though this is a trine between your career and your in a financial house, so dissolving obstacles, creating more flow to self-worth and your career, dissolving obstacles, creating more flow potentially to a financial situation, financial budgets, and the work that you do or the work that feels fulfilling. Mercury and Jupiter rule 2 axes in your chart. So whatever is sort of flowing or happening around this time, it has the potential to create new outcomes to your 1st and your 7th house axis, and or your 4th and 10th house axis. So for those of you who are relatively new to astrology, the reason why I say that is because Mercury, even though it's in your Pisces 10th house of career, public recognition, it rules your Gemini 1st house of self and your Virgo 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So maybe there is something financially or something going on with work, or something's flowing to maybe create new potential outcomes to your presence, your ability to take independent action, or it's creating potentially new outcomes to unfold with home, family, property, real estate, including renovations, relocations, etc. This Mercury trine Jupiter, again, Jupiter rules your 10th house of career, business, public recognition, as well as your Sagittarius 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So again, this can also create potentially new outcomes to those Jupiter ruled areas, such as personal and professional partnerships, including marriage, if applicable to you, as well as maybe some new outcomes to career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So again, Mercury is trine Jupiter between a financial house and your career house, but Mercury and Jupiter rule your 1st and 7th house axis, you versus your partnerships, as well as your Virgo 4th house, and Pisces 10th house. So your foundation, home, family, property, real estate, and your career, your public recognition, your visibility, what brings you fulfillment. So even though this is a trine, I think it's either going to create new outcomes, potentially new outcomes to you and sort of like business partnerships, personal partnerships, or sort of something foundationally and even including your career as well. That could really start to roll out in April. Now, Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 2nd house, as this full moon is really culminating, still technically in a full moon phase, it is technically in a T-square with the sun and the moon in this full moon phase. So Jupiter in your Cancer 2nd house of earned income and self-worth is getting 2 squares, a square from the sun and a square from the moon, which is a full moon, which I think really energizes this T-square, which puts a lot of pressure on Jupiter to take action. And like I mentioned before, Jupiter rules your 10th house of career, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. So some of you could be really taking action regarding a financial situation in your career, your business, your public recognition. But Jupiter also rules your Sagittarius 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, the partnerships you want to make versus the long-term partnerships that are in your lives, including marriage, if that's applicable to you. And taking action to create new outcomes to those areas. That could be financially related, could be career related. Again, it could be personal or professional for some of you. Take what resonates. Then when we get to April 6th, so we get a little bit later into the week, really getting into the next week. So April 6th, which is a Monday. I'm just going to line this up a little bit more if you're watching. So once we get to like April 5th, which is Sunday, April 6th, Monday, again, it depends on what time zone where you are. Either way, we have an exalted sun in your Aries 11th house of social network and long-term goals, square Jupiter in your Cancer 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. So these two will be at 16 degrees. So the sun and Jupiter will be at 16 degrees between Aries and Cancer. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the week, there was a full moon. The sun and the moon was forming a T-square with Jupiter in that 2nd house. Now the moon has moved on. And now it's just now this square is between the sun and Jupiter as we get to like April 5th, April 6th. Why this is important is because these two are left in a square where they are both exalted. So both of these planets are sort of like honored guests. So you have the sun exalted in your Aries 11th house of social network, long-term goals, being the honored guest there. And Jupiter being the honored guest in your 2nd house of earned income, self-worth. So this is really highlighting, I think, your self-worth, your groups, your friends, your communities, and or sort of your long-term goals, your finances, long-term financial budgets, long-term financial goals, etc. are sort of some of the potentials. Because both of these are exalted, this is a very strong square, in my opinion. So this is where the strength, the resources, I think might be there for a lot of us to take action, to create new outcomes between sun-ruled areas and Jupiter-ruled areas. So yes, this is happening around long-term goals, social network, self-worth, and your finances. But I think whatever action you are taking as you get to April 5th, maybe even the weekend of April 4th, 5th, getting into April 6th on Monday, whatever action you are taking around this time, it could create new outcomes to your partnerships, Your personal and professional partnerships can create new outcomes to your career, your public recognition. So really, as Gemini Rising, you're getting into April, you might be given opportunities, or even if it's a little stressful, it's a little tense, I mean, it is a square, it could give you the ability to kind of get up and go to create that tangible change regarding sort of a career situation or a personal and professional partnership situation. But because the sun is also involved, some of you might be communicating differently. Some of you might be changing things within your everyday environment in order to do so, because the sun rules that third house of communication, exchanging information. So some of you might literally be taking action by having conversation, exchanging information to initiate that change. So it's not just literally like a get up and move your body. It could literally be, because the sun rules that Leo third house, creating and initiating that change to communication, exchanging information, short distance travel, that can help sort of initiate that change, create new tangible outcomes to those areas. The last thing I will mention is that as the square is taking place, Venus will be forming a sextile to this North Node in your Pisces 10th house of career, public recognition, and it will be forming a trine to the South Node in your Virgo 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So whatever some of you are maybe thinking about, maybe working on behind the scenes, maybe some of you are having private conversations with sort of your close connections or close partnerships, it could maybe initiate opportunity or flow to the area of your overall career, what feels more fulfilling to you. And some of you might even see it happening in your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of your April horoscope that I will post on April 5th. Hi, Cancer Risings. So right on April 1st, we are kicking off the month with this full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So as you're going into April, you know, what's going on foundationally? What's going on with the people you live with, family, relationships with family, even property, real estates, including renovations, relocations, that could be really highlighted, culminated, illuminated around this time. Now, yes, this is a full moon in your 4th house, but also for some of you, this could really be also illuminating sort of 10th house career, business, public recognition themes. So some of you, there could be something that sort of makes you feel like you have to be in 2 places at once going into April. Maybe there's a lot happening, especially because, yes, this is a full moon in Libra, but the sun is exalted in this full moon in your Aries 10th house of career, business, public recognition. So I think for Cancer Risings, especially with you going into April, with this full moon in angular houses, so your 10th and your 4th, this could really be energizing, you know, what's going on foundationally, but also maybe pulling you in business, career, things happening there, or vice versa. Maybe some of you are, you know, things happening with business, career, public recognition, but then something is really pulling you towards home, family, property, and real estate at this time. And going into April, it might require some of you to really balance those 2 areas briefly going into April 1st. Now, what's interesting about this full moon, particularly for Cancer Risings, is that not only is this happening in angular houses, so there's more, just over the years, what I've noticed with clients, even myself, things happening in angular houses like your 4th and your 10th tend to create more potential for like visible external things you can see. And the ruler of this full moon in your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate is Venus. And Venus will be home in your Taurus 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals. So the good news is that Venus is quite comfortable in Taurus. You know, Venus is home here. Good amount of resources, strength, etc., theoretically speaking. However, As this full moon ruled by Venus is culminating, Venus is forming the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 8th house of other people's resources. Think financial themes, investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable. This could even be 8th house. They call it, the house of transformation, but I think I tried to keep things as practical as possible with people, and like transformation, it's, I think some people get caught up in like, oh, it's alchemy or romanticize this transformation. And that might very well be the case for some of you, but transformation could be big decisions. Big decisions you're not going to go back on. When we make decisions and they happen, it transforms into a new chapter, a new situation, a new scenario that we can't undo. So some of you might be making big decisions. Some of you might see this play out with long-term goals, finances. Either way, Venus was conjunct this Pluto in your Aquarius 8th house towards the end of January. So some of you might actually be able to think back towards the end of January, what was really starting, what was being seeded, what was playing out, that at this point when Venus is creating that opening square, some of you could be taking action on. Some of you could be creating that tangible change through finances, financial themes, resources, making big decisions that can create new outcomes to a home, family, property, real estate theme, or create new outcomes to your long-term goals, friends, groups, communities, etc. So I think for Cancer risings, this is a very interesting full moon, where I think it creates this potential for, I think, a lot of Cancer risings to like literally take action on some financial themes, or taking action through big decisions and long-term goals that really plays into this full moon that's culminating something around those home, family, property, real estate themes. Additionally, on this day, literally April 1st, like we're still on April 1st, this is crazy. Mercury in your Pisces 9th house of growth and potential. So this could include stuff like travel, spirituality, higher knowledge, publishing, teaching, really growth and potential themes. It could also be career related for some of you. That Mercury will be applying to a trine to Jupiter in your Cancer 1st house of self, the physical body, how you take independent action. So yes, this is a trine between you, growth and potential, hopefully dissolving obstacles, creating more natural flow to being able to expand your ability for independent action after maybe reviewing and revising, some stuff over the past month or so. However, Mercury and Jupiter rule 2 axes in your chart. So whatever is sort of flowing or unfolding around this time, it could create new potential outcomes to your 3rd and your 9th house axis, as well as your 6th and 12th house axis. So, breaking it down, again, Mercury rules your Gemini 12th house, Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 6th house. So we're going to take this 12th and 6th house axis first. So as whatever's flowing, whatever's, happening, unfolding at this point as you're going into April, it can create new potential outcomes to changing your routines, work, focusing on your health, your vitality, what's changing around what's going on with you mentally, your subconscious thought patterns, sleep, solitude. So some of you might be looking at creating new routines, new outcomes to your mind and your body, your mental and physical health, trying to dissolve obstacles to maybe focus on your mental and physical health, your work, your routines, as whatever is amplifying as you're going into April is happening. Now, Mercury rules your Virgo third house. And Jupiter rules your Pisces ninth house. So the other axis, this third and ninth house axis. So as this Mercury Jupiter trine is happening, whatever's flowing, whatever's unfolding around this time, it could potentially create new outcomes to the other axis, this third and ninth house axis, involving sort of your everyday environment, those people, places, and things. So your communication, your transportation, those appointments, phone calls, tasks, exchanging information, versus your ninth house. What's the bigger picture here? What's, the knowledge you're seeking, the bigger picture. Maybe there's travel themes sort of amplifying around this time. Maybe there's new outcomes changing to travel plans, or your knowledge, your spirituality, your beliefs, your truth, etc. Now, for some of you, that can be more personal. And for some of you, it might be more professional, right? So again, take what resonates, leave the rest. Now, as we get to, before I move on, still on April 1st. So the last thing I want to touch on for April 1st is this Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer first house will technically be in a T-square with this full moon across your 10th and 4th house. So Jupiter's getting 2 squares. 1 square from the sun, 1 square from the moon, which basically means there's a lot of pressure for this Jupiter to act. So as things are energizing and amplifying, and, I think there's a lot of potential here, this Jupiter has a lot of pressure to act. Now, that Jupiter is in your first house of self, your ability to take independent action, and it's exalted. So it is the honored guest there. It is well resourced. So I think as you're going into April, a lot of Cancer risings, you might experience just like the energy, whether it's like energetic or physical, or, just your ability to move forward, your ability to take action regarding the business situation, the career, versus the home, family, property, real estate situation, to create new outcomes to your work and or health routines. So some of you, there might be a lot amplifying with, what's going on with business, what's going on with public recognition, versus maybe something's playing out with home, family, property, real estate. You're trying to balance those two things, as this Jupiter in your first house of self has an enormous amount of pressure to take action. So some of you might potentially really feel that desire to take action, to balance what's going on with work versus home and family. And because Jupiter rules this 6th house, some of you might really be looking at sort of your health and or work routines in order to do so. How much time do I have in my day? What is my routines? Maybe some of you are changing your routines to accommodate what needs to balance between sort of the career versus the home and family situation. And with Jupiter also ruling that Pisces 9th house, some of you might be seeking sort of, maybe I want more education, I want more knowledge. I need some of those, spirituality or growth and potential themes in order to help educate myself, or believe in myself, or have faith in order to balance those two areas that I mentioned. Wow. All right, now we can move on. So we're going to move on to later in this first week of April, really getting into the weekend. So April 4th, April 5th. I'm on April 6th, but I think some of you might feel this over the weekend as things are really applying in these aspects. So as we get to, again, I'm on April 6th, but some of you could really be feeling this April 4th, April 5th. And the first thing I want to point out on this day, again, I'm on Monday, the sun at 16 degrees in your Aries 10th house of career, business, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment, will be in a square with Jupiter in your Cancer first house of self, physical body. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the week, that full moon, where Jupiter was forming that T-square with that full moon. That moon has moved on. And now the sun and Jupiter are just in a square aspect to each other between your 10th house of career and your first house of self. So why this is important is because these two are left in a square configuration where both of these players are exalted. So the sun is exalted in Aries, honored guest there, strong, well-resourced. Same thing with Jupiter in your first house of self. So in terms of a square creating the opportunity to take action, to create tangible change, I think there's a lot of strength. I think there's a lot of well-resourced, maybe even for some of you, like the vitality, the power, the expansion in order to do so. So this square could be playing out between you personally, your career, your public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. However, the tangible change and potentially new outcomes it can create as you get later into the first week of April, after that full moon starts to dissipate or wane, the new potential outcomes with this square could create new outcomes to sun-ruled areas, which is going to be your Leo second house of earned income and self-worth. So some of you could be taking action regarding your business, your career, public recognition, taking independent action that consequently creates new outcomes to those second house themes. So your finances, your financial budget, your self-worth even. The other area of potential outcome from taking action is going to be those Jupiter-ruled areas. So Jupiter rules the sixth house of daily work and or health routines. So some of you could really be continuing to sort of evaluate your routines, your work, your coworkers, or this could be more to do with your physical body, your health, your vitality. So changes to those areas, as well as potentially, taking action and changing anything regarding travel plans, spirituality, truth, belief. Some of you could be career related, especially with the sun in your 10th house of career. So especially if you're in like publishing, teaching, you travel for work, some of you could be taking action on something to create new outcomes to those areas. So definitely look out for that. The last thing I want to mention, as we're on the weekend of April 4th, 5th, again, I'm on April 6th, Monday, Venus, again in rulership, in your Taurus 11th house of friends, groups, communities. So your social network, whether it's personal or professional, as well as your long-term goals, will be sextile the North Node and trine the South Node. So this could really create opportunities to not only your long-term goals and who you want to surround yourselves with, but also sort of, your communication, siblings, extended family. So some of you might see a lot of support or flow from sort of siblings, extended family. Some of you might see it through your communication, exchanging information, and sort of opportunities to gain more knowledge. Again, spirituality, travel, which could be career related. For some of you, that might create new outcomes to your long-term goals, your social network, and even create new outcomes to something foundationally for some Cancer risings as you're moving into April 2026. So definitely stay tuned for your April monthly horoscope part 2, which will be posted on April 5th. As a Leo rising myself, I am so ready for April. I mean, I know April might be a lot, but if you're a Leo rising and you've been following me for a while, you most likely are so sick of Pisces transits at this point that you're just ready for the fire. You're ready for Aries season. All right, so literally kicking off on April 1st, we have this full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra third house. Now, this third house, I think this full moon, I have a general idea of what I think this might really bring up for the majority of us. But this full moon, yeah, it's happening in the third house of communication, exchanging information, technology, transportation, short distance travel, which could be career related, especially because the ruler of this full moon is Venus, and Venus will be in the Taurus 10th house of career, business, public recognition. But we'll get to that in a second. So yes, this full moon at 12 degrees is illuminating sort of communication, exchanging information, technology, transportation, which could be personal or professional, especially if you work in those fields. But the third house is also, siblings, extended family. So some of you might be seeing stuff really culminate, or you might be seeing things happening with your siblings, your extended family. Like you might be watching them go through something, or sort of something could be really like highlighted or culminated for them. So again, lots of potential, but I think because the full moon, again, the sun and the moon in opposition, if you're watching, the sun will be exalted in this full moon in your Aries 9th house of growth and potential. So this could include stuff like long distance travel, spirituality, truth, belief, higher education, higher knowledge, publishing, teaching. So these growth and potential themes could be career related, again, for some of you. So I think on like a general mundane, everyday sort of level, this full moon could really highlight like the appointments, the phone calls, the task, the to-do list for some of us. And it could be to really set things up to align to the overall growth and potential, right? It's sort of like we have to pay our bills and we have to do the appointments and we have to take care of stuff in order to like focus on the higher knowledge, in order to travel. There's a lot of like mundane stuff you have to take care of in order to do long distance travel. So there's a lot of things that can come up, but I think this is really just like illuminating what needs to be taken care of in your everyday environment in order to focus on the bigger picture, especially after the past couple years with all the freaking Pisces 8th house transits. Can I get a hallelujah? I mean, a lot of us, it's been brutal. So this could just be the time where a lot of us are stepping into April and saying, all right, what do I need to get done? What do I need to organize? What do I need to take care of in order to focus on those growth and potential themes, which could be career related for some of you. Now, getting back to this full moon being ruled by Venus in the Taurus 10th house of career, business, public recognition, what feels more fulfilling. Again, that's another potential indicator that whatever's being really highlighted and illuminated with that 3rd and 9th house axis, it could be career related. Now, the good news is like Venus is in rulership in the Taurus 10th house. So Venus is home here. Venus is comfortable here. So the other thing I want to mention about this Venus is that April 1st, Venus will be starting to form that opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships. So I want you, if this resonates, think back to the end of January 2026. Some of you might be able to recall, career, business, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment, those kinds of themes playing out. What was going on again, if it resonates, what was being seeded, what was being started or initiated that could have also involved, your personal and professional partnerships. Venus in this opening square in rulership in your 10th house of career, business, public recognition is that opening square. It's that initial, hey, what action do you want to take? What tangible results do you want to make at this point? What changes do you want to make? Edits to maybe what you were really initiating or thinking about, or what was playing out. And for some of you in the partnership arena as well, back towards the end of January. So very, very interesting stuff how this full moon is really culminating things, energizing something, as the ruler of this full moon is creating that opening square to take action, to create tangible change that creates new potential outcomes to career, business, public recognition, or new potential outcomes to sort of your everyday lives, your communication, exchanging information, siblings, extended family, your neighborhood, your community. So some of you might be seeing the new outcomes on a personal level, and some of you might be seeing the outcomes on a professional level with the areas that Venus rules in your charts. Okay. I did not get everything. We're still on April 1st. Like this is how ready I am for April 1st, or April in general. Okay. So we have a couple more things to touch on April 1st. Okay. So the other thing I want to mention going into April is, let's start with the Mercury in your Pisces 8th house applying to a trine to Jupiter in your Cancer 12th house. So there's kind of a lot to unpack with this trine, especially because this Mercury was recently retrograde, is now going back over the territory it retrograded over. So I think this trine is different because you've had time to pull back, review, revise, perfect. So Mercury trine Jupiter, sure, is between your 8th house of transformation, which could include big decisions, payouts, long-term financial themes, investments, assets, debt, loans, taxes. It is tax season in the US, so this could be amplifying those themes. Partners' resources, if applicable. So again, it's happening between the 8th house, but also Jupiter in the 12th house. So behind the scenes, what's going on privately, behind the scenes, subconscious thought patterns. So again, this trine is different for a lot of Leo risings, in my opinion, because this Mercury was retrograde and initially trined Jupiter, then went retrograde, trined Jupiter again, and is now applying to its last trine with Jupiter in Cancer. So this isn't new. We're sort of like concluding this trine. So yes, it's between the 8th and the 12th. However, what is flowing, what is happening that a lot of you had time to review and revise, it can create new potential outcomes to 2 axes in your chart. The first axis is going to be your Virgo Pisces axis, because Mercury rules your Virgo 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. And Jupiter rules your Pisces 8th house of those long-term financial themes, partners' resources if applicable, transformation, big decisions. And so because Mercury and Jupiter rule this Pisces Virgo axis, it can create new outcomes to your overall finances. This is a financial axis. So, whatever's going on behind the scenes, whatever you've really reviewed, revised, maybe gotten really organized or gotten to the bottom of, it could really create sort of new flow and outcome to your financial outlook or financial picture. The other axis it can create potential outcomes to is going to be your Gemini Sagittarius axis. So your 11th, 5th house axis, because Mercury also rules your Gemini 11th house of your social network and your long-term goals. And Jupiter also rules your Sagittarius 5th house of joy, creativity, self-expression, children, if applicable to you. So whatever is flowing and unfolding around this time with Mercury's last pass to trine Jupiter in Cancer, it could create new potential outcomes to your long-term goals, friends, groups, communities, as well as new potential outcomes to more joy, more creativity, more self-expression, or new potential outcomes that also affect your children if applicable to you. So lots of potential outcomes. Again, take what resonates, leave the rest. The last thing I want to touch on April 1st, we're still on April 1st, is that when this full moon culminates on April 1st, again, across this 3rd and 9th house axis that I touched on, Jupiter will actually be technically in a T-square with the sun and the moon in this full moon. So Jupiter is receiving a square from the moon on April 1st, and it is also receiving a square from the sun on April 1st. Now, the moon moves relatively quickly, but I think it's worth mentioning that the T-square, even if it's just for a few hours during this day, that some of you might feel is worth mentioning because T-squares put an enormous amount of pressure on the apex planet. In this case, it is Jupiter in your Cancer 12th house. So some of you could be feeling a lot of mental pressure. Some of you might be feeling a lot of sort of like your thought patterns, what's playing out sort of behind the scenes in private. You could just feel a lot of pressure internally. It may not, it's, the 12th house isn't a very visible house to the world. So some of you might be experiencing sort of inner pressure to varying degrees briefly on this day to take action regarding something in your everyday immediate environment. That could be appointments, tasks, phone calls, communication, exchanging information, short distance travel, a situation with siblings, extended family, as I mentioned, and also feeling that internal mental pressure to take action around sort of the growth and potential, the higher education, the travel, the publishing, the teaching. Again, it could be career related for some of you. So pay attention to what's going on, like that internal mental pressure briefly on this day, but depending on where you are, I think it's worth mentioning if you feel it, just to kind of say, hey, it's brief, it will pass. And I'll get to the Jupiter Sun square that goes exact later in the first week of April, which I think will be a different story playing out. So let's see, what's the next day I have is April 6th. Now I say April 6th, which is a Monday, but I think a lot of us can feel this really April 4th, April 5th, because the applying aspects often are felt a little bit more intensely just from, working with people. So where do I start? Let's start with, I guess I'll start with the Sun-Jupiter square. So as I mentioned, that Jupiter on April 1st will be in that brief T-square. But as the moon moves forward throughout the week, the moon wanes, the sun will be applying to form a square with Jupiter at 16 degrees between your Aries 9th house and your Cancer 12th house. So again, I think a lot of you could feel this over the weekend, April 4th, April 5th, certainly by Monday, April 6th. But the moon has moved on. And for the remainder of this first week going into April, the sun applying to this square to Jupiter is interesting because these two are left in a square where both of them are exalted. So the sun is that honored guest in your Aries 9th house, and Jupiter is that honored guest in your Cancer 12th house. So yes, this square is playing out, or you could see it play out with sort of what's going on privately, what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on with your dreams, your mental thought patterns, as well as, how that's maybe playing out with, your spirituality, your truth, your belief, your higher knowledge, which all of these things could be career related, travel even. So definitely pay attention. This is very interesting. The square is interesting because both of them are exalted, but the sun is in a very visible area of your chart. But then Jupiter is in a very private area of your chart. And so it's sort of this interesting square where you could be taking action to create tangible change to Jupiter-ruled areas and sun-ruled areas, but some of it might be behind the scenes and some of it might be more visible, okay? So whatever the action and change you are taking as you get into the first week of April, certainly by the weekend, the first weekend in April, it could create new potential outcomes to sun-ruled area, which is your Leo first house. So new outcomes to the way you take independent action, your physical body, your appearance. This sun is also trine your first house. So, some of you might really feel that flow. Some of you might be getting your sunshine back, your sparkle back, especially after these past couple years where so much has been in Pisces and averse to your first house of self and the physical body. So I'm hoping that we get a little bit of our Leo sunshine back, with the sun in Aries ruling our first house. But, it might require us to take some action around our mental thought patterns, things that are playing out behind the scenes. But ultimately, it can really create new outcomes, potentially to our appearance, our physical body, how we want to move and show up in the world. The other area of potential new outcomes that might happen from you taking action with this square is Jupiter ruled areas. So Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 5th house. So some of you might be taking action to really step into maybe a more joyful chapter in your lives, focusing on time with your children, maybe if that's applicable to you, your creativity, your self-expression. So again, focusing on the positives of these potentials. I think going into April, this could be an opportunistic time for some Leo risings to say, you know what, I'm going to shift my mental thoughts. I'm going to re-energize myself. Where can you step out? Where can you shine a little bit more? Where can you focus on, stepping into a new chapter where there's more joy, more creativity, more self-expression. And the other Jupiter ruled area is that Pisces 8th house. So I think, this might be a very interesting interpretation, but I think the square between your ruling luminary, the sun, and Jupiter, I think this, with Jupiter ruling the Pisces 8th house and theoretically creating new outcomes to those areas after whatever action you're taking, some of you might be creating new outcomes, yes, to the 8th house, the transformation work, the decisions, the long-term financial plans or pictures or whatever. But I think this could also, this might be a stretch, but I'm getting an intuitive hit about it, so I'm going to say it. This might be the point in time where a lot of Leo risings close the door on the past 2 to 3 years. There's so much that has happened in this Pisces 8th house that I think a lot of Leo risings might be taking action to say, you know what, I'm going to step into this new chapter of creativity and self-expression and joy, and really take any last minute action around my subconscious thought patterns, what I need to take care of in private, behind closed doors, whatnot, in order to initiate that. And with Jupiter ruling that 8th house, just kind of say, but in order to do that, I got to let go. I got to let go of, the past 2 to 3 years that has been, working with a lot of Leo risings over many years, really, really hard for a lot of you. I don't just speak for myself, but there's been a lot of tests and challenges, with the 8th house, Saturn the 8th in a water sign, no joke. So I think this might be the point where a lot of Leo risings pivot. Okay, lost my train of thought. The last thing I will mention is, as this square takes place, I want to point out that Venus around 8 degrees in rulership in your Taurus 10th house of career, business, public recognition will also be in a trine to your South node in your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth, and a sextile to the North node in that Pisces 8th house. So again, these nodes are across technically your financial houses, and Venus in rulership is finally making a sextile, which could be opportunistic, and a trine to create flow and dissolve obstacles. So making sort of technically opportunistic and more ease and flow to the nodes in your financial houses with a Venus in rulership. So definitely looking at, in addition to whatever action and change some of you are taking, how are some of you taking that, and also looking at sort of how you can create opportunity and flow to, more love and value to your career, your business, your public recognition, how maybe some of those growth and potential themes are playing into that, those career themes, but how it's also for some of you creating, the opportunities to take and a little bit more ease and flow, friendlier aspects to the nodes across your financial houses. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of your April horoscope on April 5th. Hello, Virgo risings. So April 1st, we really kick off April with this full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. So this full moon, if you're watching, you can see the moon and the sun in opposition, really highlighting your 2nd and 8th house, which are financial houses. So a lot of you could really be going into April focusing on finances. There could be just financial themes, budgets, balancing sort of what's yours versus partners' resources, if applicable to you. So, again, generally speaking, this full moon is really highlighting your financial houses. However, I think there's an interesting thing going on in the background that's directly connected to what this full moon could mean for you Virgo risings. And this full moon is ruled by Venus. And Venus will be in rulership. So Venus is home in your Taurus 9th house of growth and potential. So I like to call the 9th house growth and potential because it's really the area of like the bigger picture, your higher knowledge, continuing education, long distance travel, spirituality, publishing, teaching. So this could be career related for some of you. So some of you could be looking at sort of financial themes, investments, assets, debt, loans. They could be playing into, travel plans, investing in your career, your business, investing in higher knowledge, continuing education. So again, how are those financial themes or resources playing a part in what you could be looking at around this time. Maybe some of you are looking at investing in those growth and potential themes, or how those themes that could be career related are playing a part in your financial future. The other interesting part about this Venus is that as you are going into April, this Venus, again, ruled by this full moon in a financial house, is starting to form that opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So some of you might be able to think back to roughly around the end of January of 2026. What was happening around that time? Some of you, it could have been, work related or health related. But Venus rules your 2nd house of earned income and that Taurus 9th house of those growth and potential themes, which could be career related for some of you. Either way, what was kind of going on? Some of you, again, if it resonates, what was going on towards the end of January that is related to any of these themes that I've discussed thus far, that as Venus is now creating that opening square to where it joined Pluto towards the end of January, the opening square is that point of change, of action. So some of you could be, taking action to change something, to edit something that could be, that could create new outcomes to sort of your finances, your financial budget, your self-worth, travel, spirituality, higher knowledge, publishing, teaching, if applicable to you. Again, this opening square is that first point of action to initiate change and create tangible results for some of you to Venus ruled areas, which again is the growth and potential, the financial themes, your value system, your self-worth. So this full moon, I think, has some complexities to it. Again, it's going across financial themes, but some of you could be taking action involving a work situation, a health situation, that could be, financially related, or there could be money involved with like a health situation or a work situation, where some of you could be looking at, again, investing in more knowledge, more growth and potential. That, again, could also be financially related. So strong financial themes as you're going into April, where it's directly connected to like a health situation, a work situation, or again, sort of continuing education, travel, growth and potential themes that could be career related for some of you. Now, again, there's so much happening as we're going into April. Speaking of career related, Mercury in your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships rules your 10th house of career and public recognition. It also rules your Virgo 1st house of self, physical body. Now, this Mercury at 14 degrees on April 1st will start to form and apply to a trine with Jupiter in your Cancer 11th house of social network, your friends, groups, communities, long-term goals. So yes, this trine could be playing out between your social network, personal and professional partnerships, connections, long-term goals, etc. However, Mercury and Jupiter rule 2 axes in your birth chart. And those 2 axes are the potential axes that could create new outcomes with this trine. So, the first axis that Mercury and Jupiter rule in your chart, Virgo, is going to be your Gemini 10th house of career, public recognition, and your Sagittarius 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. Again, Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. And Mercury rules your Gemini 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So whatever could be flowing or sort of happening between your personal and professional partnerships, your social network, which could be professionally related, long-term goals, it could create new sort of outcomes to literally your career, your public recognition, or home, family, property, real estate themes. The other axis that Mercury and Jupiter rules is going to be your Virgo 1st house of self and your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So again, Mercury rules your 1st house of self, the physical body, how you take independent action, and Jupiter rules your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, or the partnerships you want to make. So whatever is flowing and happening that could be playing out with sort of your social network, connections, long-term goals, it could create new outcomes to sort of like you versus the other, your needs versus the needs of others, create new outcomes to your personal and professional partnerships, new outcomes to your physical body, ability to take independent action, etc. So lots of stuff happening. And again, the reason why I point out the two axes that this Mercury-Jupiter trine going into April could create new outcomes to is because Mercury at 14 degrees, Mercury's been here a few times. I want to remind you, Mercury went over this 14 degree mark or 14, 15 degree mark. Then it retrograded. Then it went direct and now it's going over it again. So that Mercury's had some time to review, revise, pull back. And so, yes, this Mercury is technically in detriment, fall. So, but it's been here. This is nothing new. So I think this could be the point where it's that last pass in the cycle with the trine to Jupiter and Cancer. So sort of like we've been here, we've done that, we know what we're doing. And some of you could really be saying, all right, I'm ready to kind of see the flow, take advantage of it, create new outcomes to those areas I just covered. Now, jumping to this Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals, this Jupiter will be square this full moon. And this full moon, yes, is at 12 degrees, but it will still technically be in a full moon phase, even when this moon gets to 15 degrees and forms an exact square. So some of you may feel this. Again, the moon moves quickly, but I think it's worth mentioning any T-squares that can be forming, because T-squares, there's a lot of pressure to take action. So Jupiter is in this T-square with this full moon, right? It's getting two squares. It's getting a square from the moon in your Libra 2nd house, and it's getting a square from the sun in your Aries 8th house. So there's a lot of pressure for this Jupiter in the long-term goal, the social network arena, to take action. But this could be a brief, some of you, again, take what resonates. Like some of you might feel this, you might not. Again, it's worth mentioning. But when it comes to long-term goals and like your social network and stuff like that, some of you might feel a lot of pressure to take action, yes, to these financial houses, but ultimately to create new outcomes to your personal and professional partnerships and a home, family, property, real estate situation that could be playing out for some of you. Is that everything I wanted to touch on April 1st? There's so much happening. I think, yes, I think I can move on. All right. So yeah, that's just April 1st, folks. Yeah. So I'm going to get to later in the first week of April. Now, I think a lot of us could feel what I'm about to talk about the first weekend in April. And so like April 4th, April 5th, but certainly by April 6th, Monday, which is what I'm on if you're watching. And April 6th is when the Sun-Jupiter square is going to be finishing. So again, I think a lot of you could feel that applying aspect over the April 4th and April 5th. But basically the moon has moved on. So that Jupiter has kind of gotten out of that brief T-square. And now it's just the Sun and Jupiter left in a square as we get into the later part of the first week of April. So the reason why I think this is important is because both the Sun and Jupiter are exalted by essential dignity. So they're sort of, they're sort of like the honored guest in those areas. And there's a lot of strength. There's a lot of resources. And with these two, with the Sun and Jupiter both exalted, and it's sort of like both of them are coming to the conversation on an equal playing field with a lot of strength and a lot of resources. So that changes things. If you have a square with one planet that doesn't necessarily have the strongest essential dignity and one does, one has a little bit more strength, a little bit more say. So it depends on the situation, but both of them are very, very strong, and it's a square. So it's an action aspect. It creates friction. It creates tension to get us to get up and to take action for tangible change. So squares are not always a bad thing. Yes, they can be tense. They can be stressful, but squares get us to make change for tangible results. And so I think this is a powerful square happening as we're going into April, and the Sun is literally in Aries season, exalted here. So yes, you could see some action and change around maybe some financial themes, making some big decisions that could involve, long-term goals, personal and professional social network. But where you could see potential new outcomes based off of that action could be sort of professional partnerships, personal partnerships, as well as, anything you're working on behind the scenes. So you could see new outcomes to, your own personal thought patterns, what you're working on behind the scenes. But I think a lot of you could see, through the action, creating the change to maybe those financial themes, making big decisions, long-term goals, social network, I think a lot of you could see the new outcomes to a sort of personal and professional partnerships. Maybe some of you are taking action to sort of align something within personal or professional partnerships that could influence sort of your long-term goals or financial themes. The last thing I want to touch on as we're sort of finishing up the first week of April is that Venus in rulership in that Taurus 9th house. Again, I love to call the 9th house growth and potential, your spirituality, your long distance travel, higher knowledge, continuing education, bigger picture, publishing, teaching. So some of this could be career related for some of you. That Venus in rulership, again, Venus is home here, Venus is comfortable, will sextile that north node in that 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So whatever's going on where some of you might be taking action, creating change to something, Venus sextile this north node in the 7th house could create opportunities for personal and professional partnerships. Venus will also be trine the south node in your Virgo first house. So again, creating flow, maybe hopefully creating a little bit more ease to sort of your needs. How you want to take independent action, how you want to kind of show up in the world. So I think all in all, Venus is in the background, I think helping create sort of the opportunity and the flow in balancing sort of your needs versus the needs of others. What's going on with you, what supports you, your ability to take independent action, and sort of where are you aligning in personal and or professional partnerships as you are going into April. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of your April horoscope, which will be posted on April 5th. All right, Libra Risings, it looks like you get to kick off April right on April 1st with a full moon in your Libra first house of self, physical body. So this full moon is at 12 degrees, again, in that first house of the self, the physical body, your appearance, how you take independent action. But this full moon is really highlighting your first and seventh house axis because the sun and the moon are in opposition in the chart. So yes, absolutely culminating, illuminating, sort of like putting the spotlight on you, but also, could be bringing up seventh house personal and professional partnership themes. So balancing your needs versus the needs of others, what's going on with you versus what's going on with personal and professional partnerships that could be sort of energized or illuminated around this time. Now, this full moon and your ruling planet rules your first house of self and the physical body is Venus. And Venus will be in rulership in your Taurus 8th house of really, this is like a long-term financial house. So investments, assets, debt, loans, partners, resources. So if you are partnered up, if you are sort of dealing with like financial themes in partnerships, this could definitely be highlighting that and integrating that around this time. But Venus in your Taurus 8th house. So whatever is culminating again around directly involving you, your appearance, your physical body, also including sort of partnership, this could be a time where it is also sort of highlighting or even creating the action or change to a financial situation, financial themes, again, partners' resources if applicable, or some of you could just be making like big decisions that affect you personally or big decisions regarding sort of like financial plans. And I say that because as Venus is in rulership here, ruling this full moon culminating in your first house of self, that Venus is forming the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 5th house of joy. So this one's interesting because some of you might be able to think back maybe around the end of January, like what conversations were happening, what was coming up with some of you, like it might have involved your children, if that's applicable to you. So what situations were going on with your children? What situations were going on with, enjoying yourselves, choosing joy, creativity, self-expression? That, again, if it resonates, it might not have anything to do with that. Some of you might think back and say, that those weren't the themes being highlighted. Some of you, it could have just been themes regarding you and finances as well. Either way, if it resonates and you know what was going on towards the end of January, the opening square that Venus is making to Pluto is potentially creating that opening point of action that some of you could personally be taking because Venus rules, you, your physical body, yourself, your ability to take independent action. So something could be really illuminated, energized, culminated, highlighted around you versus your personal and or professional partnerships that now has some of you taking action to create tangible change to sort of the long-term financial themes, resources, taking action by making decisions you're not going to go back on. And that can create change to those areas, but be sort of affecting you personally. So whether it involves you or whether it involves you and personal and professional partnerships, I think this could definitely be sort of having you take action around sort of like financial themes, making big decisions that create lasting change to you, how you take independent action, your finances, your transformation, partners' resources, if applicable. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that on April 1st, we will have Mercury in your Pisces 6th house of daily work, health, and routines applying to a trine to Jupiter in your Cancer 10th house of career, business, and public recognition. So yes, this trine could create the opportunity for flow between sort of the work, the routines, the health, the career, what feels fulfilling. But whatever is flowing after a time of reviewing, revising, maybe slowing things down the past month, whatever is flowing or happening between those areas, you could see sort of like you could see yourselves creating new outcomes to sort of your overall growth and potential, which could be career related as well. So some of you could be really looking at sort of the bigger picture, what growth and potential you want to be focused on, which could include like travel themes, higher knowledge, publishing, teaching. Again, it's not limited to those themes, but as this full moon is culminating, again, tying in those financial themes, maybe partners' resources if applicable, you could additionally sort of be able to look at sort of like the work, the career, what feels fulfilling to you, and sort of say, okay, how can I take this and start focusing on the new outcomes and the potentials to the area of growth and potential. But Jupiter rules this Pisces 6th house of daily work, health, and routine. So simultaneously, you could really be creating new routines, new health, wellness, vitality routines that can shift your overall growth and potential, shift your, mental health, subconscious thought patterns, things going on behind the scenes. So there's a lot of potential here. But I would say, whatever has slowed down, reviewed, revised, with Mercury recently gone retrograde, now direct, and forming another trine with Jupiter in this 10th house, where going into April, what areas of your life do have ease and flow? And how can, maybe some of you are looking at those areas and how you can leverage them for more solitude, more rest, recharge, growth, and potential. So again, some of you might be looking at where you can sort of create more flow, or the areas that do have more flow, so that you can start opening up the routine, opening up more health, vitality, the work that you want to do. So this could be very sort of like personal, day-to-day stuff for some of you, as some decision or financial situation could also be playing out to create new outcomes for you and sort of how you want to move through the world, which includes your physical body, as some of you could be really trying to focus on the health, the vitality, etc. around this time. So again, lots of configurations, lots of potentials moving into April. But the last thing I want to mention for April 1st is this Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 10th house of career, business, and public recognition will be technically in a T-square on April 1st with the sun and the moon, with this moon in a full moon phase. So there's a lot of pressure on this Jupiter to act. So some of you might feel the pressure to act literally within, your career, your business, your public recognition, to balance your needs versus the needs of others. Or maybe there's something playing out regarding you versus personal and professional partnerships that, is also putting a lot of pressure for you to also focus on what's playing out with career, business, public recognition. Whatever it is, Jupiter is getting 2 squares, 1 square from the moon, 1 square from the sun. And so Jupiter could start to, as you literally go into April, start to create new outcomes to your overall health, wellness, work routines as well as with Jupiter ruling your Sagittarius third house, like this could be the pressure to create new health and work routines, but also the pressure to create new outcomes and potentials to sort of your everyday environment. And so taking care of appointments, tasks, phone calls, exchanging information, maybe stuff with siblings, extended family, things going on in your everyday environment. So again, I think Libra risings, you could be kind of going into April looks interesting because it looks like some of you might be busy in the mundane, busy in the routines, trying to get back on, the health, the wellness, the work situation, while you're trying to finish up something financially that could involve, partners' resources, but also focusing on sort of your physical body, your appearance, how you want to move through the world, and how all of this might be playing a part in it. So very, very interesting how it's kind of, I don't want to take up too much time in this, but this is, it looks like you could be going into April with a lot of different areas requiring your attention to create new outcomes to more focused areas that you want to focus on in 2026. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving on to April 6th. So lots of sort of energizing, amplifying as you go into April, the first week of April. Then when we get towards the end of the last week of April, so I'm on April 6th, but some of you could really be feeling this April 4th, April 5th, so Saturday, Sunday, but definitely by Monday. The moon will have moved on. The moon is waning. And what's left is the Jupiter-Sun square, continuing to build throughout the first week of April. Why this is important is because both the Sun and Jupiter are exalted. So it's sort of like if you have two people entering a conversation, they both are strong, well-resourced. Jupiter and the Sun are basically like the honored guest in Cancer and Aries. So again, it's not like one person is coming with like a leg down and one person sort of, coming with a leg up. Both are sort of entering this square or this conversation with a lot of strength. And I think that makes the square more prominent and more potent for change. And so, again, a lot of you could be feeling this throughout the first week of April, but certainly over the weekend of April 4th, 5th, definitely by the 6th. That Sun in your Aries 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. This also includes marriage, if that's applicable to you. And Jupiter in that Cancer 10th house of career, public recognition, business, so a lot of you could be seeing this play out in your career, your professional partnerships and connections, or sort of, what feels fulfilling to you, your public recognition, and those personal connections, personal partnerships. But whatever action that a lot of you are taking this first week of April that could really culminate towards the end of the first week of April, it can create new outcomes to sun-ruled areas. So whatever tension or action you're taking, some of you might be able to see how it's going to create new potentials and outcomes to your Leo 11th house of long-term goals and your personal and or professional social network. So some of you could be taking action professionally to expand your social network and your long-term goals, or some of you could be taking action to create new outcomes in your personal partnerships, but sort of who you want to surround yourselves with. Some of you could also be kind of taking action to change your social networks personally, who you want to surround yourselves with, that aligns to those long-term connections you want to make in 2026. So the other areas of potential outcome that I think this action or change could make is, again, to this Jupiter, this Pisces sixth house of health, work, and routines ruled by Jupiter. So again, whatever action you are taking around your career, your public recognition, regarding your personal and professional partnerships, it could create new outcomes to sort of your routines, your health, your work, literally. So, some of you could be taking action to change your work schedule, your routine, who you want to work with, coworkers. And some of you could be doing this also for health purposes. Some of you could be taking action regarding, a work situation, personal and professional partnerships to focus more on, your wellness, your health, your vitality. Because a lot of times, like our work, our business affects our ability to focus on our health and wellness. So some of you, it could be as general as that. The last thing I want to touch on as we're finishing up this first week in April is going back to this Venus in rulership in your Taurus 8th house. Again, financial house, so investments, assets, debt, loans, partners, resources if applicable, transformation, making big decisions. This Venus in the background is going to be sextile the North Node in that 6th house of daily work and or health routines. And it will also be trine the South Node in your Virgo 12th house of behind the scenes, subconscious thought patterns, solitude, sleep, a more private house, things that are more hidden. And so as you're taking action to, with career, business, what feels fulfilling regarding a personal, professional partnership or the partnership you do want to kind of move towards in 2026. The Venus sextile this North Node is sort of like whatever changes or situations played out, like financially, financial budgets, making big decisions, transformational work. That Venus at this point is starting to say, hey, what opportunities can we now see or increase and move towards regarding the health, the work, the routines? So some of you later in the first week of April could start to see, okay, if it resonates, what's going on with those financial themes, or what do you really love and value about where you want to take your financial future that could involve a partner's resources, if applicable, that now maybe you're starting to see, okay, how can I invest in the work I want to do, the health and vitality I want to feel, and create more ease and flow to maybe sort of like my mental health, my ability to rest, recharge, kind of have more time alone, sleep, dream, solitude. So definitely stay tuned for part 2 of your April monthly horoscope, which I will post on April 5th. Hi, Scorpio Risings. So kicking off literally day 1, April 1st, you have a full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 12th house of behind the scenes, dreams, subconscious thought patterns. Really, this is like more of a private, hidden area of your chart and thus lives. So this could really be illuminating more private, more behind the scenes stuff. But with all full moons, I always like to consider the opposite house and how it's also playing a part or reflecting what could be culminating or really energized around this time with a full moon. And for you, that is your 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So where the sun will be involved in this full moon, shining its light, and it's also exalted here. So it's sort of like the honored guest involved with this full moon. So this full moon is really highlighting your 6th and your 12th house. So a lot could be happening, mentally, behind the scenes, sleep, rest, solitude, and sort of what's going on with your physical health, your physical health, your mental health, what's going on behind the scenes that could be affecting sort of your work, your health, and your routines, and what's going on with your work, health, and routines that's affecting you behind the scenes, mentally, even as day to day as sort of like your sleep schedule. So definitely want to pay attention to how you're balancing your mind and your body as you are going into April. The ruler of this full moon is Venus. And Venus will be in its place of rulership. So Venus is comfortable. Venus is home here in your Taurus 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships, including marriage, if that's applicable to you. So what's interesting about this full moon culminating and its ruler, Venus, in its place of rulership, is that Venus is starting to form the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So whatever could be sort of energized or really culminated or highlighted around what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on mentally, what's going on with your health, your work. Some of you could start to see like your work and your routines become more focused, more energized, more highlighted around this time. So it could be as simple as that. But regardless of what is culminating, how is it playing a part in this opening square between your personal and professional partnerships and what's going on with home, family, property, and real estate? So Venus was conjunct Pluto, initiating this new cycle back towards the end of January 2026. So some of you might actually be able to think back towards the end of January 2026. What was really happening? What were you starting, initiating? What was playing out? Some of you could have been between, something with partnership, home, family, where now this opening square could be sort of the opportunity to take action, to create tangible change regarding personal and professional partnerships, to create tangible change to what you've been sort of working on or what's been happening behind the scenes for some of you. So some of you, it could be sort of even, taking change to create tangible sort of outcomes within personal and professional partnerships that also involves something playing out with home, family, property, real estate themes as well. The other interesting part about April 1st, again, there's so much happening on April 1st, like it's insane, is Mercury. Mercury will be at 14 degrees in your Pisces 5th house of joy. This is really, creativity, self-expression, children, if applicable to you. Mercury will be applying to a trine with Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 9th house. If you're new here, I like to think of the 9th house as growth and potential. Could be career related, but really sort of, your faith, your spirituality, your higher knowledge, travel, publishing, teaching. Again, it could be career related for some of you, but Mercury applying to a trine to Jupiter could create the flow or ease after Mercury has done this retrograde business in this Pisces 5th house of children, creativity, self-expression, romance, joy, etc. So this Mercury doing sort of like that final trine after that revisionary period to Jupiter in that Cancer 9th house. Some of you might start to kind of see more of that flow, but in a way where you've thought about it. You've had some delays, you've maybe pulled back, you've turned inward, whatever it may have been. And so whatever's flowing now might take on a different perspective, but it could have the potential to create new outcomes to two axes in your chart. The first axis that it could create potential changes or new outcomes to at this point is going to be your 2nd and 8th house axis, because Mercury rules your Gemini 8th house and Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 2nd house. So whatever could be flowing again between those 5th and 9th house themes that maybe takes on a new perspective because this Mercury has recently just gone direct. You've reviewed, you've revised, etc. You know, the 2nd and 8th house, those are financial houses. So some of you might be sort of seeing where you can look at your overall growth and potential, what feels more joyful to you. It could include like child planning, child themes that also involve taking a hard look at creating new potentials and outcomes to financial themes, including partners' finances, if applicable. The other axis it could potentially create new outcomes to is your 5th and 11th house axis, because Jupiter rules your Pisces 5th house of children, joy, creativity, self-expression. Again, children, if it's applicable to you. And Mercury rules your Virgo 11th house of personal and professional social network, long-term goals that could be career related. So again, looking at sort of your overall joy, creativity, self-expression, children if applicable to you, and sort of the overall growth and potential, and how, you know, it's potentially having you look at new outcomes to what feels joyful for you, and how that aligns to sort of long-term goals, who you want to surround yourselves with. So what else on this day? Oh, the last thing I want to talk about on April 1st is how this Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 9th house will actually be technically in a T-square with this full moon as we go into April 1st. So this T-square is putting a lot of pressure on Jupiter to take action. So the full moon is, again, across the 6th and 12th house axis. What's going on with your mental and physical health? What's going on with your routines, your vitality, your work, etc. Excuse me, that this Jupiter is getting 2 squares. It's getting a square from the moon. It's getting a square from the sun. And so this Jupiter has a lot of pressure to take action, maybe regarding like a work situation, a health situation, trying to, balance whatever it is going on with those 6th and 12th house themes, and take action to kind of maybe expand your overall growth and potential, or the direction you want to move towards, to create those new outcomes to those Jupiter ruled areas, which is your 2nd house of earned income, and also your Pisces 5th house of children, if applicable, creativity, self-expression. So some of you might be feeling a lot of pressure to take action around like your health and work routines, what's going on behind the scenes, to really set yourselves up for success moving forward, to not only kind of like keep expanding the overall growth and potential themes that could be career related, but also like how it's going to create new outcomes for you financially, with children, if applicable, child planning, if applicable, creativity, self-expression, joy, really like your heart's desire at this time. So that's day 1. So that's going to kind of play out the first couple days of April. And then once we get to the weekend, so really around like April 4th, April 5th, certainly by April 6th, when by the weekend, I think a lot of you are going to feel this like April 4th, April 5th. But again, I'm on Monday, April 6th. When the sun and Jupiter at 16 degrees, the sun will be starting to separate on Monday, which is why I think a lot of you will feel this over the weekend. But anyways, the sun and Jupiter will be in a square. So the moon has waned. It's waning. It has moved on. And it has left for the remainder of the week, the first week in April, it's left Jupiter and the sun in this square configuration. Now, why is that important? The reason why I think this is important is because it's basically left two planets, or technically a luminary, in exaltation in a square. So the luminary, the sun, is the honored guest in Aries, and Jupiter is really the honored guest in Cancer. And so you have basically two people entering a conversation, building this first week of April with a lot of strength, a lot of dignity, a lot of resources. It's not like one person is a leg down or needs explaining to or needs a little help or is a little lost. Both of these are very strong. They're well dignified, essentially. And so they're coming to the conversation as equals. And this is a square. So I think there's a lot of strength and resources and ability to create change, to create tangible change. Now, a lot of you could be seeing this play out regarding, your health and work routines with the sun in the 6th. And, even with just Jupiter in the 9th with sort of your overall growth and potential. So some of you could be sort of increasing your knowledge, increasing your faith and spirituality, travel to support sort of your health, your work, expand your routines for the work, the health, the growth and potential, whatever it may be, whatever action you are taking throughout the week of April, particularly the second half of the first week of April. You could create new outcomes to the sun-ruled area, which is your Leo 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what feels more fulfilling to you. So some of you could be taking action to create new outcomes that could come, in the near future regarding sort of your career, your business, your public recognition. Some of you could even be taking action to create new outcomes to the Jupiter ruled areas. So your second house of earned income. So some of you could be taking action regarding growth and potential, your work, your health, your routines, to support a financial situation, your self-worth, your value system. Or it could be to support this 5th house of children, maybe sort of like opening your routines for more time with your children if applicable, or, maybe it's like a growth and potential health routine situation to support sort of family planning if that's applicable. But for some of you, the other 5th house themes are going to be your creativity, your self-expression, more joy. So some of you could really be taking action and changing your routines, your work, and your health to maybe open up life a little bit more for more fun, more joy, more creativity, more self-expression. But I think you're also going to be looking at that other Jupiter ruled area, which is your second house of finance, how to keep supporting that, basically. The financial budget that's going to support the overall growth and potential, support the health, the work, the routines, but also support the joy, the creativity, the self-expression, and children if applicable to you. So the last thing I will touch on, finishing up the first week of April, is that Venus in your Taurus 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, including marriage. Venus is in rulership. Venus is home here. Venus is comfortable at home. And this Venus will be sextile the North Node in your 5th house of creativity, self-expression, joy, children, if applicable to you. And so this could be, opening up opportunities for Scorpio risings regarding sort of like your connections with others, the connections you want to make with others, or just your current personal and or professional partnerships, opening up sort of an opportunity for more joy, more creativity, more self-expression, and children, if applicable. But this Venus will also be trine the South Node in your Virgo 11th house. So, maybe creating a little bit more ease and flow to sort of the people you want to surround yourselves with, your social network, your community, your long-term goals that might be playing a part in being able to surround yourselves with people that really support the overall direction you want to take with your joy, creativity, self-expression, and children, if applicable to you. So definitely stay tuned for your April monthly horoscope part 2, which I will post on April 5th. All right, Sagittarius Risings. Right on day 1, April 1st, you will have a full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 11th house of social networks. So think friends, groups, communities, and also long-term goals. So some of you could really see the illumination, the activation, the culmination of something within friends, groups, communities, or a long-term goal, which could be career related for some of you, depending on your natal chart. Now, this full moon, if you're watching, or if you're listening and you can't see, is really the sun and the moon in the chart in opposition. So this could also be reflecting 5th house themes. What's going on with children, if applicable to you, creativity, romance, joy, and sort of what's being culminated regarding those themes for some of you, if it resonates, regarding your overall long-term goals and who you want to surround yourselves with. So the ruler of this full moon is Venus, and Venus will be in rulership. Venus is home in your Taurus 6th house of daily work and or health routines. So whatever is culminating around this time, for some of you, again, your social network, long-term goals, which could be career related for some of you, with the ruler of this full moon, Venus in the 6th house of daily work, health, and routines, the long-term goals, the social network could be sort of career and work related, or it could be sort of, what's going on with your overall health, mental, physical health, vitality, and routines sort of impacting those areas as well. But the one thing I want a lot of you to focus on, if it resonates with this Venus, is that this Venus in Taurus is starting to form the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 3rd house of communication, siblings, extended family, really those people, places, and things within your everyday environment. However, if you work with communication, technology, transportation, this could be career related or work related for some of you, especially with Venus in your 6th house of work. So the opening square, some of you might be able to think back to when Venus was conjunct or joined with Pluto here, back towards the end of January 2026. So what was really being initiated, what was really happening, towards the end of January 2026, that for some of you could be playing into this opening square where you're going to be taking action to create tangible change regarding that story that's playing out or been playing out. So for some of you, it could be related to that situation that started towards the end of January, or for some of you, it could be really this opening square initiating the change regarding sort of your work, your health, your routines that could be career related, or sort of, who you want to surround yourselves with and how some long-term goals might be playing into that as you're going into April, or how those themes are being energized as you're going into April. Now, the next thing I want to talk about on April 1st is Mercury. Mercury at 14 degrees in your Pisces 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate will be applying to a trine with Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 8th house. Think 8th house of long-term finances, investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable, especially because Mercury rules your 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So that could really be highlighted between what's going on foundationally versus sort of personal and professional partnership resources, financial themes, making big decisions. So this could really start to create the It's a trine, so, it technically creates the flow and dissolves the obstacles. But what I want to point out specifically about this trine is Mercury's already been here twice. So Mercury went over this point, trined Jupiter direct. Then Mercury went retrograde recently, trined it again, trined Jupiter again. And now Mercury has recently gone direct and is passing over the trine aspect one last time with Jupiter. So this trine is different, in my opinion, because whatever's been delayed, reviewed, revised, slowed down, where you turn inward, that could have involved, your personal or professional partnerships, including marriage, if applicable to you, or even career themes as well, because Mercury does rule your Virgo 10th house as well. Either way, this trine is different because it's not like a trine just happened and it created flow and ease. It was, you've had to review and revise it. You've had to gain different perspectives over the past month regarding sort of the home, family, property, real estate, and sort of the financial themes or the decisions being made for some of you if it resonates. Now Mercury's last pass, it's sort of like, well, you've gained the perspective. You've kind of, this isn't your first rodeo with this trine, and you've gained different perspectives and different angles on it. And so, yes, this is a trine between Mercury and Jupiter, but I think this is the point where you could finally potentially see the outcomes to two axes in your chart. The first is going to be your 10th and 4th house axis, because Mercury rules your Virgo 10th house of career, business, public recognition, and Jupiter rules your Pisces 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So whatever's going on literally foundationally with home, family, property, real estate themes, and again, those financial themes, partners, resources, if applicable, making decisions, you could see the outcomes to sort of career, business, public recognition, and additional outcomes or changes to this foundational part of your chart and thus life. The second axis it could create new outcomes to is going to be your 1st and 7th house axis, because Mercury rules your Gemini 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, including marriage, and Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 1st house of self, the physical body, how you take independent action. So whatever flow at this point is happening, again, where maybe you have different perspectives, or you've been working with this for a while, you could really start to maybe create or see new outcomes to your physical body, how you want to show up in the world, your identity, and also new outcomes to, things playing out within your personal long-term partnerships, whether they're personal or professional. The last thing I want to talk about, we are still on April 1st. This is crazy. The last thing I want to talk about on April 1st is this Jupiter at 15 degrees of Cancer is technically in a T-square with this full moon across your 11th and 5th house axis. So Jupiter's getting a square from this full moon, and Jupiter's also getting a square from the sun involving or shining its light on this full moon here, which basically means that some of you might experience a brief, because it's the moon, but you might experience a brief intensity or pressure to take action with this Jupiter in this 8th house of finances, partners, resources, sort of long-term financial budgets, big decisions. So some of you, I don't think all of you, but some of you could definitely feel the need to take action, that pressure around sort of like a financial situation, an investment, an asset, debt, loans, partners, resources, making a big decision that could also involve sort of long-term goals, situations with your children, creative projects, etc. Now, that whatever action you do take, it could create additional sort of new outcomes, again, to that 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate, as well as your first house of self, right? Because Jupiter rules your first house of self. It also rules this Pisces fourth house. So if you're taking additional action or you're feeling that pressure with sort of the financial situation, partner's resources, making a big decision, it could create new outcomes or sort of new potentials and situations to sort of you personally, but also the foundation of your lives. I think that's it. All right, I'm going to move on to April 6th. So April 6th, I think a lot of us are going to feel this over the weekend. So I would say you're probably going to feel this intensify over the weekend. So April 4th, April 5th. I'm on April 6th, so certainly by April 6th, when the Sun and Jupiter will be in a square. Now, I want to give perspective. So the first part of the week, that Jupiter was in that T-square with the full moon. Now the moon it's waning. It's moved on. And it is left for the second half of the week, predominantly left Jupiter and the Sun in this square aspect between your Aries 5th house and your Cancer 8th house. So what I want to point out about this is that it's basically left two planets. Well, technically the Sun is a luminary, in a square where they're both exalted. So where the Sun and Jupiter are both exalted, they're both sort of the honored guest. They have a lot of dignity. They have a lot of strength and resources in the area that they're in. And so in this square where more action can be taken at this time, which I'll get into in a second, both of these players are coming into the conversation more so as equals. They're both strong. They have a lot of strength. And I think that adds to the intensity or the strength or the resources in order to take action around this time. Again, I think a lot of this could happen over the weekend, so April 4th, April 5th, but this is happening between your 5th house of children, if applicable to you. This could be home and family related, depending on your natal chart. Creativity, self-expression, and also Jupiter in this 8th house. Again, the financial themes, the resources, the partner's resources, if applicable, making big decisions. So there could be some major things for some Sagittarius risings around this time between like finances and children, finances, partner's resources, big decisions, and sort of, for some of you, home and family, if your IC is in your 5th house, or creative projects, joy, self-expression, how you want to integrate that with whatever's going on around this time. However, where I really think a lot of Sagittarius risings are going to see new outcomes with this square, new outcomes to the action being taken, it's going to be to potentially the Sun-ruled area, which is your Leo 9th house of growth and potential. So some of you could be taking action regarding, this could be as simple as like the 5th house of joy and the 8th house of finances, partners' resources. Some of you could literally be taking money to focus more on joy and pleasure for, again, create new outcomes to Sun-ruled area, which is your Leo 9th house, which is a long distance travel house. So some of you, like this could be as minimal as some of you investing in a trip, in travel, or some of you could be sort of taking action to invest in sort of your knowledge, your spirituality, overall growth and potential themes that could be career related for some of you. So it could be as simple as like, investing in fun or a vacation, taking action for that, or literally investing in like continuing education, publishing, teaching, really like in taking action to invest in your growth and potential which could be career related. Could involve your creativity, your self-expression, etc. So again, take what resonates, leave the rest. The other potential outcomes to this square between the Sun and Jupiter is those Jupiter ruled areas. So whatever action you're taking, it could also create new outcomes to your Pisces fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. So again, like if you have children, if that's applicable, financial themes, partners, resources, taking action around those situations where it's creating sort of a new situation with home, family, property, real estate themes could definitely be on the table, as well as the other Jupiter ruled area, which is your Sagittarius first house of the self, the physical body, investing in your body, your appearance, how you want to feel, how you want to move through the world. So many potentials here. So definitely take what resonates and leave the rest. The last thing I will leave you with is going back to this Venus. So towards the end of the first week of April, Venus is going to be in a sextile to this North Node in your fourth house of home, family, property, and real estate. And it will also be making a trine to your South Node in your Virgo 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So Venus is in rulership, strong, well-resourced, very comfortable here in this sixth house of daily work, health, and routine. So some of you might see some flow and maybe, hopefully a little bit more ease to sort of like your work routines, career, business, public recognition. But some of you could really see, maybe some of you are focusing more on what you really love and value about your routines, what you want to fill your routines with, the work that you really love and value, the health and vitality you want to feel and you want to value, that could really help support or create opportunities for more time with family, more time at home. Some of you could just be focused on, home, family, property, real estate, relocations, renovations, as maybe there's, for some of you, this could be as simple as like, maybe your career, your work, your business is like there's ease and there's flow. And maybe some of you are just taking the time and the opportunity to literally focus or increase your focus on what's going on with home, family, property, and real estate. So definitely stay tuned for your April monthly horoscope part 2, which I will post on April 5th. Hi, Capricorn Risings. So right on April 1st, you will have a full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So very visible area of your chart, and thus life really being highlighted, illuminating, or culminating something regarding those themes. But this full moon, if you're listening and not watching, is really the sun and the moon in opposition. So this is really highlighting your 10th and 4th house axis. So right off the bat, going into April for Capricorn Risings, there could just be a lot highlighted around your business, your career, your public recognition, and, also what's pulling you regarding a home, family, property, real estate theme as well. So some of you might really see both of those themes and sort of the this full axis really being highlighted and illuminated, and even sort of just busy or more energized around that axis going into April. Now, this full moon is ruled by Venus, and Venus will be in rulership in your Taurus 5th house of joy, including creativity, self-expression, children if applicable to you. So maybe if you have children, maybe something's going on with that 4th house of home, family, property, real estate, and balancing what's really culminating around career, business, public recognition. But for some of you, especially if you're a creative, self-expression, artistry, anything along those lines, some of you could really, with this full moon being ruled by Venus and Venus being in that 5th house of creativity and self-expression. That could be sort of integrating more of the creativity and the self-expression being highlighted or really illuminated in the 10th house of the career, the business, the public recognition. I normally don't do this, but if you work in real estate or interior design or sort of anything within those themes as well, that Venus in the 5th house of creativity ruling this 10th house, especially if you're IC, if you know your natal chart and your IC is in your 5th house, I could definitely highlight those themes if that is applicable to you. Anyways, this Venus is starting to form the opening square to Pluto in that Aquarius 2nd house of earned income and self-worth. So this could be really increasing or creating action regarding financial themes as something is culminating around like a career, work, public recognition situation with this full moon. Now, Venus was conjunct Pluto, creating this new cycle back towards the end of January 2026. So some of you might be able to think back towards the end of January 2026 and start to see sort of similar themes or that point in sort of the story that's been unfolding start to play out with this opening square. Sort of like the opening square in the cycle sometimes presents itself as like, hey, what's the action you want to take? And for you, it could really be the action around career, finances, and really ultimately what brings you joy. Now, going to Mercury at 14 degrees in your Pisces 3rd house of communication, exchanging information, transportation, technology, which could be personal or professional, as well as siblings, extended family. So again, the people, places, and things within your everyday environment. Mercury is starting to form or apply to a trine to Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 7th house of personal and or professional partnership. So this trine is interesting because Mercury has gone direct, retrograde, and now back over the point. So it's basically trined Jupiter technically 3 times at this point. So it's nothing new. This trine is interesting because it's sort of like a lot of you might have new perspectives. You've reviewed, you've revised, you've kind of, you've had some time to work with this. But this is basically Mercury's last pass over this area to form this trine to Jupiter in your Cancer 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So yes, this can technically, it's a trine, it can create flow, dissolve obstacles to sort of what's going on in your everyday environment, communication, exchanging information, and sort of how that's sort of impacting your personal or professional partnerships or connections you do want to make. But I think at this point, it could also create new outcomes to 2 axes in your chart. The first axis, it could sort of create the opportunity for new outcomes to is going to be your 3rd and 9th house axis and Mercury rules your Virgo 9th house and Jupiter rules your Pisces 3rd house. Now, the 3rd and 9th house axis, there's a lot of potential here. So personally, this could be sort of creating new outcomes for, growth and potential, travel, spirituality, and sort of communication, exchanging information, relationships with family, siblings, extended family. Now, professionally, this trine could start to open up or create new outcomes and potentials for, communication, technology, short distance travel, which could be personal too. But I think with Mercury ruling this Virgo 9th house, some of you could see potential outcome, like new outcomes or opportunities for higher knowledge, higher education, teaching, publishing. So if you're like a writer, a teacher, you travel for work, or your work involves a lot of like communication and exchanging information and higher knowledge or spirituality, this could really be highlighted around this time, as Mercury is trine Jupiter and really highlighting that axis. The other axis that this could potentially create new outcomes to is going to be your 6th and your 12th house axis, because Mercury rules your Gemini 6th house of daily work, health, and routines, and Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 12th house of behind the scenes, subconscious thought patterns, solitude, more of the hidden private stuff in our lives. And so a lot of you could see, new potential outcomes become more visible to you regarding sort of your mental and physical health. This could also be work related as well. So maybe there's communication and sort of flow to new professional connections or professional partnerships that's opening up opportunities for sort of work in your routines. Maybe there's things kind of like playing out, or you're trying to balance sort of mind-body themes. So some of you could be work-related, and then with the 6th and the 12th, it could be more sort of like physical and mental health related, creating new outcomes and focusing on that with this trine. Potentially for some of you, if it resonates, really creating that flow, hopefully that flow and ease after some reviewing and revising, maybe regarding a work situation, routines, or a health situation that now you can kind of hopefully get the green light to move towards. The last thing I will mention on April 1st is this Jupiter at 15 degrees in Cancer will technically be in a T-square with the full moon. So it's basically getting 2 squares. It's getting a square from the moon in your Libra 10th house of career and public recognition. And it's also getting a square from the sun in your Aries 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So there's a lot of pressure that some of you might feel to take action. Now, not all of you are going to feel this because the moon moves quickly. But I think it's worth mentioning if you start to feel that pressure to with something happening within your personal or professional partnerships, or the pressure to have to partner up with someone professionally, connections, etc., to kind of help balance whatever's going on with home and family, or career, public recognition. Now, this is brief, the moon moves quickly, but I think it's worth mentioning that if you're feeling that pressure, maybe kind of wait a few hours, wait for the moon to kind of wane, and it will kind of dissipate. But I think it's worth mentioning. And then when we get later into the first week of April, now I'm going to sit on April 6th, but personally, I think we're going to feel the effects of this April 4th, April 5th, as the applying aspect is happening, is when we often feel the applying aspect happens. So over the weekend in the first week of April, a lot of you are going to start to feel the potential effects of the Sun-Jupiter square. Okay, so again, the moon has waned, the moon has moved away from that full moon and has left Jupiter and the sun the second half of the week in a square. So why this is important, I think it's important to mention because the sun and Jupiter are both exalted. They're sort of, by essential dignity, they're the honored guest in this area. So when they come in aspect to each other, or conversation, as I like to say, with each other, it's sort of like two people coming into a conversation that are both extremely strong, well dignified, and well resourced. They're both coming at the conversation, or in this case, the square or the action, from equal playing fields, so to speak. So the sun will be in your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. And Jupiter will be in your Cancer 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So this is creating that potential sort of friction or tension. It could be very strong with both of these both of the, you know, Jupiter and the sun exalted. And so what happens is as the square takes place, there could be some tension that gets us to get up, to take action. And for you, it could be playing out regarding home, relationships with family, people you live with, property, real estate themes, as well as playing out regarding sort of personal and professional partnerships, including marriage, if applicable to you. But I really think this, whatever action you are taking, especially the second half of that first week, it could create potential new outcomes to sun-ruled area, which is your Leo 8th house of long-term finances, resources, partners' resources, if applicable, making big decisions, which could be part of you taking action around this time. And the other potential outcomes that could come from taking action for some of you is going to be the Jupiter-ruled areas. So new outcomes to your Sagittarius 12th house. So new outcomes to sort of what's going on mentally, new outcomes to subconscious thought patterns, what you're working on behind the scenes. And Jupiter also rules your Pisces 3rd house. So whatever action you're taking could really be creating new outcomes to literally your everyday lives, those people, places, and things. Like it could be as mundane as like your car, your laptop, your phone, or maximal as like new outcomes to relationships with family, siblings, extended family, communication, which could be professional for some of you, especially with Venus involved. And so this action could really create new outcomes to relationships with family, neighbors, community, new outcomes to communication, technology, transportation, short distance travel themes. A lot of potential here. But the other thing that I like, yes, this is a square between the sun and Jupiter, creating new outcomes to those areas I just mentioned. But Venus and rulership in that Taurus 5th house of yours, which is the 5th house of joy, children, if applicable, creativity, self-expression, will be sextile the North Node in that Pisces 3rd house of communication, exchanging information, technology, transportation, siblings, extended family, again, your neighborhood, your community, your immediate environment. And it will also be trine the South Node in that Virgo 9th house of publishing, teaching, higher knowledge, continuing education, travel, spirituality, all of those growth and potential themes that could be career related for some of you, especially because Venus literally rules your 10th house of career, business, public recognition. And so all in all, whatever action you are taking, it could definitely create outcomes to like financial themes, your everyday environment. But Venus is sort of in the background, I think, helping provide that sextile, sort of that opportunity to increase, the communication, the exchanging information, the stuff going on in your immediate everyday life, and then trine that South Node in that 9th house. So hopefully creating some flow, some ease, the dissolving of obstacles around those growth and potential themes that could be career related. So Venus is sort of in the background, I think, helping balance out this 3rd and 9th house that could have, had some shifts, some changes at this point in time. So definitely stay tuned for your April monthly horoscope part 2 that I will post on April 5th. Hi, Aquarius Risings. Right on April 1st, day 1, we have a full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 9th house. I like to think of the 9th house as growth and potential themes. So think spirituality, truth, belief, higher knowledge, continuing education, long distance travel, publishing, teaching. So some of this could be career related for some of you. And so this full moon is essentially, maybe culminating something around those themes, even themes I didn't mention. What does growth and potential mean to you, even if it is career related? And how is this full moon, as you're going into April, really culminating or illuminating the growth and potential themes that could be really energized around this time? Now, This full moon, yes, it's in that Libra 9th house, but it is also involving the sun in your Aries 3rd house. So this is really highlighting your 3rd and 9th house axis. So what's really being energized in your everyday environment, your communication, your exchanging information, technology, transportation, short distance travel, that could also be reflected or playing a part in your ability to focus on the bigger picture, the overall growth and potential. Again, that could be career related. Now, the ruler of this full moon is Venus, and Venus will finally be in rulership. Venus is home now in your Taurus 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So this Venus is doing something interesting around a Venus-ruled full moon. This Venus is starting to form the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 1st house of self, the physical body, how you take independent action. And so some of you might be able to think back to the end of January 2026, when that Venus, this Venus, was joining or merging Pluto to create a new cycle in that 1st house of self, that now this Venus is creating this opening square to potentially create the ability to take action, to create tangible change regarding some situation or something that some of you were initiating back towards the end of January. If that resonates. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. It's still a square. And so it's still an opportunity to take action, to create tangible change to Venus ruled areas, which is where this full moon is culminating, the overall growth and potential. It could be career related, but it could also really create sort of the action and change literally happening in your 4th house of home and family, but also creating new potentials and outcomes to your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So very, very interesting here. The next thing I want to talk about is Mercury. Mercury will be at 14 degrees of Pisces in your 2nd house of earned income and self-worth, so a financial house, applying to a trine to Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 6th house of daily work, health, and routines. So what I want to point out about this trine is that this isn't just a trine, one done trine, whatever. This Mercury recently was retrograde. And so this is basically Mercury's 3rd trine with Jupiter in the past month and a half or so. So this trine is interesting because you've had time to work with it. You've had time to gain a different perspective, a different angle. Some of you might have kind of reviewed, revised, kind of pulled back, even had delays around financial themes and what's going on with the work that you want to do and your routines. And now this is Mercury's last pass over this area to create this trine to Jupiter. And so I think this is actually the opportunity to not only dissolve obstacles or create flow between the finances, the work, the health, the routines, but actually create new outcomes and potentials with whatever is flowing around this time to 2 axes in your chart. The first is going to be your 2nd and 8th house axis, because that Mercury rules your Virgo 8th house and Jupiter rules your Pisces 2nd house. So it's, I think, potentially creating new outcomes going into April to your financial houses, your earned income versus sort of your investments, assets, debt, loans, partners, resources. And so the other axis that it could potentially create new outcomes to is going to be your 11th and 5th house axis, because Mercury rules your Gemini 5th house of joy, children if applicable, creativity, self-expression, and Jupiter rules that Sagittarius 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals. So I think lots of good stuff, lots of good new potential outcomes, either to finances, resources, or sort of who you want to surround yourselves with, the long-term goals, maybe new creativity, self-expression going on that could, due to some flow around maybe your routines opening up a little bit more or finances flowing a little bit more. Whatever it may be, look for the opportunity to create new outcomes to those areas that I just mentioned going into April, if it resonates. The last thing I want to talk about on April 1st is this Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 6th house of daily work, health, and routines will briefly technically be forming a T-square with the sun and the moon on April 1st. So this full moon. And basically Jupiter is getting a square from the moon in your Libra 9th and a square from the sun in your Aries 3rd. So there's a lot of pressure on this Jupiter to take action, which is interesting because it's in a trine with this Mercury here. So although there's like flow to that Jupiter, I think some of you, not all of you, because the moon moves quickly, but I think it's worth mentioning, some of you might feel that pressure to take action around like a work or health matter. And, like there could be something going on in your immediate environment, or sort of the overall growth and potential. Some of you could kind of get a little either like overstimulated or just feel the need to take action on too many things. Again, this is brief. I don't think all of you are going to feel this, but I think it's worth mentioning to kind of, because the moon moves so quickly, excuse me, that if you're feeling a little like overstimulated on April 1st, or you feel like you have to take action on too many things, the moon moves a lot faster than Mercury. So wait a few hours, wait for that moon to start separating and dissipating. If you are feeling that, if that does resonate, and then be able to kind of re-equilibrate or equilibrate and sort of step into this Mercury-Jupiter trine and look for the flow and the potential outcomes to those two axes I mentioned. Now, I think that's it. That is just April 1st. I can't get over how crazy April is. All right, moving on to April 6th. So I'm going to go to April 6th, but honestly, I think you're going to feel the effects of what I'm going to talk about on April 4th, April 5th. So really the first weekend in April, where as you get to this, I would say the second half of the first week of April, but definitely the weekend, April 4th, April 5th, certainly by April 6th, the Sun-Jupiter square. Excuse me, I've been talking for hours at this point, so bear with me. The Sun-Jupiter square. Now, the first half of the week, literally going into April, remember how I said that Jupiter is going to be involved in that T-square with the full moon? Well, that full moon has waned. It's moved on. And it has pretty much left the Sun and Jupiter in an applying square aspect the second half of the first week of April, where the Sun and Jupiter are both exalted. So they're both, the Sun and Jupiter are both the honored guest in Aries and Cancer. And they have a lot of dignity, a lot of strength, and a lot of resources. And they're in a square. So this is an action aspect. This is, the stress of the tension to get us up, to move, to change, to create tangible change. And so I think this square is well resourced. It's strong. You have two very strong players here. And so, yes, this is a square between your third and your sixth. A lot of times when I see squares between the third and the sixth, I see like, work, health, routines, taking care of appointments and errands and phone calls. So some of you could see this on a very basic level of just, I'm running errands, I'm taking care of tasks, the to-do list, I'm trying to get my work done, I'm trying to work out, I'm trying to get my routines situated. Some of you, it could be really taking action with sort of the communication, the technology. So it could be like professionally related. If you work in communication fields, transportation, technology, and you could see a lot of stimulation or action playing out in those areas. This could even involve siblings, extended family playing a part in whatever situation it is. Regardless, whatever action is happening, whatever action you are taking around this time, it could create new outcomes to the sun-ruled area, which is your Leo 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So maybe you're getting stuff done, you're taking action to kind of create more space, more outcomes, more connection potential, more personal and professional partnership potential with the sun ruling the 7th. This also, the square is obviously involving Jupiter. So whatever action is happening around this time, it also has the potential to create new outcomes to Jupiter ruled areas, which is going to be your second house of finance, your earned income, your self-worth. So you could be taking care of a lot of like appointments, errands, tasks, paperwork. This is tax season too in the US. So some of you could just be taking care of a lot of those things to really kind of create new outcomes and expansion to your finances. And lastly, Jupiter does rule this Sagittarius 11th house. So some of you might be taking care of stuff to kind of, open up your routines for more time with your social network, maybe taking care of stuff to kind of be able to open up more professional social network connections and long-term goals. So again, I think there's a lot of positive potentials playing out here. And lastly, what I'll leave you with is as the square is happening to, maybe push you to create these new outcomes that could be really positive for a lot of you. In the background, Venus is still in rulership in your Taurus 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. And Venus will be sextile the North Node in that second house of earned income and self-worth. So as this is playing out, Venus, I think, is really helping a lot of you out, where Venus is well dignified, has a good amount of strength and resources, and is providing some opportunity to finances. So maybe there's something foundationally, going on with home, family, property, and real estate that's supporting opportunity for a financial situation or a self-worth situation. Simultaneously, Venus will also be trine the South Node in that Virgo 8th house of, long-term finances. So investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources if applicable. So Venus in rulership is making, theoretically friendlier aspects to the North and South Node across your financial axis. And so I think going into April, a lot of you could be taking action and creating change, and this full moon is culminating in that area of growth and potential. But I think, ultimately there could also be sort of these financial themes playing out where some of you could be looking at your lives foundationally and creating opportunity and making decisions to create opportunity and flow to the financial areas of your life. Or some of you could be looking at sort of your finances, partners' resources, other people's resources, just those overall financial themes, and, seeing the opportunity or flow to create more ease to the foundation of your life, whether it's emotional or physical. So definitely stay tuned for your April monthly horoscope part 2, which I will post on April 5th. Hi, Pisces Risings. So right on day 1, April 1st, you will have a full moon at 12 degrees in your Libra 8th house. Now, this is a financial house, but think like investments, assets, debt, loans, long-term financial budgets, other people's resources, including a partner's resources, big decisions. So right, going right into April, a lot of you could be, there could be some culmination or some, illumination around making a big decision, financial themes, especially because, if you're listening and you're not watching, the sun and the moon in the chart are in opposition with this full moon. And so it's really also highlighting your second house of earned income, self-worth. So this is really highlighting in a strong way your financial axis. Now, the ruler of this full moon is Venus, and Venus will be in its home sign, comfortable, in your Taurus third house of communication, exchanging information, technology, transportation, which could be professional for some of you. But the third house also includes like siblings, extended family, neighborhood, community. So something, could also be really coming to fruition that is affecting sort of your everyday immediate environment with what is being highlighted with this full moon. What I want to point out about this Venus is that this Venus is starting to form the opening square to Pluto in your Aquarius 12th house of behind the scenes, subconscious thought patterns, what's going on in private, what's going on behind the scenes, where this Venus is creating that opening square, where it was initially merging with Pluto back towards the end of January. So what was really initiating? What seeds were being planted? What was really coming up towards the end of January that, this Venus, for some of you, if it resonates, is creating that opening square, that opportunity to, change, take action, create tangible results that could create new outcomes to sort of your everyday immediate environment, as well as sort of financial themes, partners, resources. So definitely, pay attention to like financial resource themes, and sort of how there could be some action being taken that could even involve like action being taken sort of behind the scenes, that somehow affects sort of like your everyday environment, if that resonates. Now, the other thing that's taking place on April 1st is that this Mercury at 14 degrees in your Pisces first house of the self, the physical body, how you take independent action, will be applying to a trine with Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer fifth house of joy, creativity, self-expression, children, if applicable to you. Now, what's interesting about this trine is that Mercury at this point, this will be like the third time Mercury has trine Jupiter, because in the past month and a half or so, Mercury was direct, initially trined Jupiter, then it went retrograde, trine Jupiter again, and now it has gone direct and is doing the final pass to trine Jupiter here. So this is not just a trine. This trine, to me, like, there's been some reviewing, some revising going on. And so Mercury rules your fourth house of home and family. It also rules your seventh house of personal and professional partnership. So some of you may be like, there's been some like reviewing, some revising regarding a home and family, property, real estate situation, something playing out with personal and professional partnership, including marriage, if that's applicable to you. So this isn't just a trine. Like, you've gained, like, things have happened. You've probably gained some different perspectives, different angles. And now the final trine here, yes, it's between your first house of self and your fifth house of children, creativity, self-expression. But I actually think that this is going to be the point that creates the opportunity to create new outcomes to the axes in your chart ruled by Mercury and Jupiter. So the first axis that could have potential new outcomes with this trine creating flow, the dissolution of obstacles, There could be potentially new outcomes to your 4th and 10th house axis because Mercury rules your 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. And Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So after this revisionary period, some delay, some reviewing, some revising that could have impacted home and family or partnership, if that's applicable to you, whatever's flowing here is sort of like, what new outcomes are you looking for or sort of walking into as you go into April regarding career? What brings you fulfillment? Or, what's going on literally with home, family, property, and real estate. Now, the other axis that this could create new potential outcomes to is your 1st and 7th house axis, because Mercury rules your 7th house of personal and professional partnership, including marriage, if applicable to you. And Jupiter rules literally you. It rules your Pisces 1st house of the self, the physical body, how you take independent action. And so this could, going into April, you could see new outcomes or just personal effects to sort of balancing your needs versus the needs of others, really sort of highlighting you and your personal and professional partnerships regarding what is sort of just unfolding at this point. So welcome to April. It's insane. So the next thing I want to mention is that this Jupiter at 15 degrees in your Cancer 5th house will technically be in a T-square with the full moon, so the sun and the moon across your financial houses. So Jupiter's getting a square from the sun in your 2nd house, and Jupiter's also getting a brief square from the moon in your 8th house. Now this is brief. These, the moon moves quickly. So, but I wanted to mention it because if you're feeling sort of the pressure to take action on this day, and you're feeling sort of that pressure, you're feeling that internal chaos, especially because Jupiter rules that 1st house of the physical body for you, maybe wait a couple hours, wait for that moon to kind of dissipate and get out of that exact full moon degree. And you might feel sort of that pressure kind of start to dissolve so that, we're making decisions from a grounded place, obviously. But I don't think everyone's going to feel this. But again, sometimes when I see stuff, I just want to mention it, because if you do go into April and you're like, oh my God, like I'm feeling the pressure to take action, particularly around like you, career, or very strong financial themes, partners, resources, it will probably dissipate. It will start to kind of fade when this full moon kind of gets out. But when we get to really like the second half of the week here, so when we get into like Thursday, Friday, particularly Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to jump to Monday just because that's when the square that I'm about to talk about starts to dissipate. But I think what I'm going to talk about here, yes, I am on Monday, but I think a lot of you will definitely feel it going into the weekend on April 4th, April 5th. Now, the square around this time is going to be between the sun and Jupiter. So the moon has moved on. It is waned, and it has basically left the sun and Jupiter intensifying this square really from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then it will start to separate Monday, which is what I'm on now. But so a lot of you could feel this as early as, Tuesday, Wednesday. Some of you could feel this, Saturday, Sunday. But this Sun-Jupiter square around 16 degrees, the sun and Jupiter is exalted. Both of these players are exalted. They are well dignified, they are strong, they are well resourced. And so when you have, it's like two people coming to a conversation, that essentially they're equals. They're equally dignified. They're equally well-resourced. There's not one person above or below. They're just coming in very, very strong. They both have a say. And they want it their way. And this square is going to take place between your second house of earned income and self-worth and your fifth house of creativity, self-expression, joy, children, if applicable to you. So some of you might feel that tension, that ability, that need to take action around a financial matter with your children, or a financial matter regarding sort of, what you want in terms of enjoying life, creativity, self-expression. The second house is also like your value system, your self-worth. So some of you might be like, you know what, like I really want to take action around valuing my time with my children, or valuing, my creativity and my self-expression and my joy. Whatever action you are taking that could intensify later in the first week of April, it could create new outcomes to the sun-ruled area, which is your Leo 6th house of daily work, health, and routines. So whatever action's being taken, whatever change is happening here, you could be creating new outcomes to the work that you want to do, the health and vitality you want to feel. The other areas that are up for potentially new outcomes is going to be the Jupiter-ruled areas. So this is really interesting because Jupiter rules your 10th house of career, business, public recognition. So I think with the sun ruling your 6th house of work and Jupiter in this square ruling your 10th house of career, some of you could really be taking action regarding, your career, your work, taking action for more money, taking action that's more aligned to your self-worth and your value and your joy. The other potentials that some of you could be making with this square is really, creating new outcomes, taking action to create new outcomes for sort of your public recognition, your public image, what feels more fulfilling to you. So some of you, like, that might be career related, but for some of you, it might be more personal. It might be, wanting to take action that could involve finances, your joy, your self-worth, to really take action to move towards things that feel more fulfilling to you. So again, take what resonates, leave the rest. But the last thing I want to leave you with is I want to go back to this Venus, because this Venus at this point, towards the end of the first week of April, will start to be in a sextile to the North Node in your first house of self, the physical body. And it will be in a trine aspect or configuration to the South Node in your Virgo 7th house of personal and or professional partnerships. So Venus is sort of in the background, I think, providing some support, some love, some value, especially with Venus being in its place of rulership. It's like Venus is in its own home. Venus is very comfortable here. It's sort of like, imagine yourself in your own home. You're lounging, where everything is. If someone comes over, you know exactly where things are to help them out or take care of them. And so this is really like Venus in your third house. Some of you could have, there could be support or love and value from siblings, from extended family, from your neighbors, from your community, from people you communicate with or exchange information with. So it could be a literal translation, but either way, Venus is sextile this North Node. So, in the background, I think helping create some opportunity to focus on your needs, your physical body, how you want to move in the world, and Venus trine the South Node in your Virgo 7th house of personal and professional partnership. Maybe creating a little help, a little ease, a little flow to the area of personal and professional partnership. So as we're getting into April, things are starting to intensify. But again, I try to look for sort of the opportunities where, Venus is in the background, I think, trying to help create the opportunity and the flow to balance your needs versus the needs of others, to balance sort of where you want to go, what you want to focus on, how you want to support your physical body, how you want to take independent action, and whatever might be playing out with personal and professional partnerships for some of you, if that's applicable. So definitely stay tuned for your April monthly horoscope part 2, which I will post on April 5th.